That brutal war between the demon lord and humanity has been raging for ages, devouring countless lives, and now it's gotta end soon because the survivors are desperate for relief. The fighting has to stop, because a hero has finally arrived, handpicked by the goddess, the very one destined to wipe out the demon king who's been tormenting them for ages. While El battled the demon lord, his best friends fought alongside him in spirit, standing right by his side, shouting that they'd hit their breaking point and had to retreat immediately before they got wiped out. The short-haired girl screamed at him in panic, begging him not to die for a damn thing, while they'd still be forced to retreat. The young man snapped his head around at his friends, shouts, roared that the rest of the fight was all on him, and demanded they run. Then, after telling her friend she was leaving, the girl threw her arms wide and launched straight into a teleport spell. El spun to the Demon King and swore he would end this for good. Then the Demon Lord came charging and El threw himself at the goddess, begging her to shield him. After the battle, El snapped his eyes open and found nothing but pitch black ahead, so he spat out a curse and blasted a light spell, then turned and saw a whole mountain of skeletons staring back, and the poor kid screamed like his soul was being dragged into fear. After the skeletons stared back at him, El snapped to a terrifying conclusion that he was trapped underground where the darkness swallowed every breath, and he begged for a way out before he died in here, gasping alive. He shot up his hand, snapped a teleport spell that lit the dungeon for one wild second and then plucked Ale out to somewhere else. When the magic faded, Ale touched down clean on the ground outside. As he looked around, it hit him, every single thing in this place was smashed to pieces, all because he'd taken down the demon lord. El shot his hand up, yanked his helmet off his armor and tossed it down at his feet. Then he straightened, whipped his head around and ruffled his hair like he owned the place. The young man locked eyes on one spot, then announced with shaking pride that he'd finally crushed the demon lord and saved humanity from total annihilation. And now he'd go offer tribute to the goddess for the protection he begged for back then. Suddenly, El's sword blazed with blinding light and he jerked his head down, stunned, asking what in the world was happening, because the glow only got brighter, whipping into a spinning vortex. The vortex exploded outward, swallowed all of LA, then shot upward like a rising nightmare. Out of it stepped a breathtaking woman, glowing bright as she hovered in the air, calm and serene with her eyes closed, and she was a goddess. El shot her gaze up at the goddess who'd chosen to show up for him, then looked down and met his eyes with a soft smile, before turning to the main character and calling him by his full name, Noel, and beaming that she was genuinely relieved he was still alive. The goddess snapped that her powers wouldn't reach the demon lord's lands, and while Noel lay unconscious under the rubble, there was nothing she could do but wonder, did he survive or was he gone for good? Noel watched as she started down to him, then blurted that the young man had been fainting for 6 whole months, so she panicked hard, and under the goddess's words, El finally opened his eyes in a daze. The moment it hit him, panic flared. So many things could have happened while he was stuck, and he blurted out, shaking with fear, "It can't be." Suddenly, Noel's mind snapped into focus. He remembered his comrades. That hit him like a punch, and his nerves went haywire as he hurriedly asked the goddess, "Are they okay?" With her chin lowered, the goddess murmured that Ollie's friends were okay, but you could practically see regret sitting on her face. When El finally heard his friends were safe, he let out a breath, slumped his shoulders and flashed a real smile. Then he shut his eyes and poured his thanks into the goddess, only for her to suddenly reach out and touch his face, leaving Noel frozen in shock. She blurted out that Allie's friends were okay, but the young man's world wasn't, not even close. Right then, the goddess's hand hovered and stopped cold just a couple of centimeters from his face, and El just stared, stunned, unable to move. The goddess revealed that Lavagna, Noel's kingdom, crowned Prince Cain Lavagna as the hero who supposedly crushed the demon lord, and he just smiled and soaked up the people's cheers, even though he didn't earn a single one. When Noel heard the news, she snapped in shock, asking how in the world the prince could have been declared the winner. Then the young man rubbed his chin, looking baffled, and said every single guy from his squad had come back, so something just didn't add up. Gathering every ounce of courage, the goddess shut her eyes and delivered the ruthless news. Noel's friends were now pretending that Ailey had never shown up at that battle, all because the royal court ordered it, and the moment she said it, El froze in stunned daze. After Noel's win was left in the dust, the goddess declared that Ienna slipped into the court as a new magician and bowed low before the king. After hearing that, the goddess kept going. Gaudel the knight had completely forgotten Noel too, and somehow walked away with a swanky mansion in the capital, plus an entire harem of beauties. Since Stella even forgot her friend and got swept up by a fake hero who tricked everyone, claiming he'd already beaten the demon lord Cain Levenius. After Noel heard this bombshell news, the goddess laid it out. Those positions were respected across the kingdom, so she was granting them as a reward. El lifted his head and straight up said that in return doesn't make any sense because these aren't just favors. They're awards. Suddenly, he snapped his gaze to the goddess, stunned speechless because Stella was actually engaged now. Then the goddess lowered her head and admitted with regret that yes, that was exactly what happened. El gasped, clutched his head and couldn't stop wondering how Stella pulled this off. Because for him, this news came out of nowhere and he'd known that girl since childhood, back when she'd been laughing, playing with him. If Noel could stomach Stella being engaged at all, the real shock hit when he learned she was engaged to Prince Cain of Levan. Then the goddess yanked Ale out of her spiraling thoughts and promised she'd de-spill why the Empire issued that decree, why everyone must stay quiet about the real hero's identity. Noel snapped her gaze up and leaned in, hanging on every word the goddess said. The goddess grabbed his attention and said the hero who toppled the demon lord was their final lifeline. But if that hero fell, the kingdom would unravel, and with it, absolutely all of humanity would plunge into chaos. The goddess revealed that the hero carried the banner of hope into this world just to rekindle the light for people crushed by years of war. The second the goddess stopped talking, Noel slapped his hand to his chin, frowned hard and couldn't believe it. She'd replaced him that easily. The goddess shot her gaze away and admitted she finally understood the emperor's real play behind the decree. He was chasing peace for the country, and right after that, El clenched harder on his sword's hilt. He jolted upright, shouting that he was alive, and suddenly it felt like everything could flip. But the goddess crushed those hopes on the spot, saying that even if Noel made it back to the kingdom, the hero's true identity would still stay locked behind a secret. When Noel's last hope got obliterated, he let out a soft, aching sigh of understanding and bowed his head, crushed by a brutal wave of mental pain, realizing that nothing would ever be the same again. The goddess rushed in to calm him, insisting the true hero's identity stayed hidden so the demon lord couldn't come back, but she also admitted the king had his own agenda, and she never imagined it would spiral this far. Bending her head low, the goddess snapped into worried silence, insisting something about it felt deeply wrong. The king's been under suspicion for ages and the goddess still won't trust him, so now she's taking matters into her own hands. The king lounged on his throne, looming over everyone, and grinned like the whole world was perfect, because the heroes had finally come from his own kingdom. After the king spotted the knight named Noel kneeling before him, he turned to Tom and told him he better keep up the fight and never slack on his duties, because from that moment on, the hard road to protecting their people and their country kicked off. With that thought burning in his chest, El clenched his fist and asked himself how things would have turned out if he hadn't been there, because back then, that was the only reason he even managed to take down the demon ruler. But now, everything Noel was fighting for had been swallowed by another man, and he didn't deserve a single piece of it. The goddess leaned over the young man and yanked him out of his own daze, cupping his face in her hands. She shot Ale a question. What was he going to do next? He dropped his head and admitted, voice heavy, that he had no clue what he was about to do next. Then he lifted his gaze with a faint smile and swore he wasn't about to calm down because he wanted to live a peaceful life. Noel stormed back to his home, staring ahead at the future, then shoved all his belongings into a backpack, huffed, threw the straps over his shoulders and blasted out the door. At last, the goddess thanked El for saving their world from the demon lord and sent him off with a blessing for whatever came next, and El stepped out of the forest straight into the city, where a knight met him at the gates, and once he was inside, El started scanning the streets like he was hunting his next chance. The goddess smiled down on Noel, blessing him with a happy life. Then, the moment he rolled into the city, he ducked into a cafe, ordered a drink and grabbed a couple plates of food while the cafe owner looked at Al and asked if he'd traveled from far away. Noel sat at the table and spotted a poster on the wall sent Stella congratulating someone on pregnancy, so he blurted, shocked, "What is this?" And the man leaned in and said it was a news report his wife had embellished. The cafe owner beamed and announced that since Stella was pregnant, then erupted in excitement, saying it was a true miracle that made the whole city rejoice. Noel took the news like a punch since Stella was pregnant and already engaged to the prince. After they ate, El dropped the money for the meal and rode out of the city, heading off to stay away for quite a while. Striding through the forest, El tipped his eyes to the sky and let out a heavy, regret-soaked sigh, because now he can't even congratulate St. Stella on her pregnancy and the world has already decided he's nothing but a ghost. Suddenly, an explosion ripped through the forest right in front of Noel, blasting a wall of fire tens of meters into the sky, while El stood there frozen, completely stunned, unable to grasp what the hell was happening. The young man clocked the explosion right from a nearby village and without a second thought he bolted toward it, leaping from spot to spot as he raced to uncover what just happened. As Noel burst over there he froze mid-step, eyes wide, brow furrowed, and bit down on his lips hard when a monstrous hydra growled right at him, whipping its many heads around. Right in front of the hydra stood a small figure, a woman. She thrust her hand out, desperate to halt the charge, but she was already crumpling, battered and badly injured. Right then, Hydra came barreling toward her and yanked all five mouths wide open at once. Panic hit her like a wave. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the end, but a sudden sound cut through the chaos, and when she dared to open her eyes again, she found herself alive. She lifted her head and gasped. There, in the middle of everything, a young man had pulled her into his arms and was blasting magic to hold back the Hydra, and when he dipped his head to look at her, he demanded to know, "Are you okay?" Hydra hated that someone showed up and blocked her from eating the girl, so she snarled in fury, then exploded forward and charged Noel. Noel didn't even blink. He launched straight at the Hydra, slashing with his sword so fast it felt like lightning, and the next moment blood blasted everywhere from the impact, leaving Noel scowling in stunned shock. To take down the Hydra, he had to rip himself away from that strange girl on the ground, so she just sat there, stunned, staring at the stranger who'd hauled her to safety at the very last second. With Hydra finally cut down and crumpled lifeless on the ground, Noel stopped right in front of the girl, rose to her feet, and blurted out in awe that this young man had just taken the Hydra down by himself, absolutely stunning. Noel finally spoke up, drawing everyone's eyes to the girl's battered state after the Hydra fight, and then Elle shot back, asking if she was okay. The girl clutched her chest, smiled, and swore she was unhurt and everything was okay thanks to him, and then she thanked Elle for saving her single-handed from Hydra. But the moment she finished, the young man froze, stared, and opened his mouth in stunned confusion. He spotted a collar clasp on the neck of the girl he'd just rescued, meaning she wasn't free at all, and he snapped, asking if he'd been wrong about his assumptions. When Elle finally caught the collar, the girl clamped her lips shut tight. She bowed her head and with pain shaking her voice admitted she's not just anyone, she's a warrior and this collar proves it, she's got a master. The girl snapped her gaze away and said, "They assigned me a mission as a warrior," then admitted they even cuffed her with this collar just to make sure she couldn't slip out while she carried it out. Noel suddenly told the girl to just rip that collar off her. When he said it, she gasped in total shock and blurted out, "Wait again, what is this?" With her hands shooting up, the girl tried to shout that this couldn't be possible, but Noel cut her off fast, slamming his hand in front of her and ripping a destruction spell through the air. Right after, the collar crumpled and dropped straight to the ground. The girl dropped to the ground in shock, totally lost on how it even happened, whispering, "That's the strongest collar, no one can break it except the head." As the girl slid into her seat, Elle clocked the truth. There wasn't just a collar on her, she had a seal too, and just like the collar, it chained her to captivity, unfree as could be. Elle promised, "Don't worry, I'll break that seal as well." Then the girl dropped onto the ground, ripped off every piece of armor and bared the seal for everyone to see. Noah lifted the cloth over her neck, stared at the mark underneath and muttered that it looked incredibly strong. The girl warned him that the seal on her was one of a kind. No matter how many magicians she dragged in, she still couldn't rip it off, and that's what she'd been told. Then Elle leaned in, stared at the seal and gently pressed his hand to her lips like it was the moment everything changed. He thrust his hand forward again, slammed his destruction spell into the seal, and right away the barrier on the girl's body started peeling off like it was burning away. Once the spell finally faded, the girl stared at herself in shock, because the seal was actually gone, even though her master had sworn it was impossible. Staring at her own hands, the girl whispered in a daze that she couldn't believe it. She was finally free, no longer anyone's property, and the moment it hit, she dropped her head and sobbed. Still sniffling, the girl lifted her eyes to Noel and grinned at him, mouthing her thanks for getting her out. Then she added that she now owed the young man because he'd helped her more than she could ever repay. Noel bent over the girl and admitted he didn't know her name, and right away she snapped back, telling him she still didn't know his either. Sarah beamed at the young man and told him her name. Then L stepped in with a grin and introduced himself as Noel Vega, and he said he was thrilled to finally meet her. Sarah's jaw dropped. Noel was so kind to her, still sitting right there on the ground, and Sarah blurted out that she was just as happy to finally meet Noel. Right after they met up, they geared up to hit the road. Only then did Noel realize he and Sarah were headed the same way all along, and he even said that out loud. Sarah thanked Ale for the clothes and Noel bowed his head, apologizing because she had to wear his things. He grinned and promised Sarah that once they got back to the city together he'd get her women's clothes. Then Sarah snapped that it was impossible now since it was a ghost town. Noel heard the words and blinked in a stunned daze, asking again. After that, Sarah and he finally reached the city, only to find it was a full-on ghost town where nobody lived anymore because nearly every building had crumbled to ruins. Sarah spun around and told me she'd heard it. The city got hit by demons. After the slaughter, the kingdom fenced off the whole area like it was sealed in stone. We finally reached the ruins and there it was, Noel's house. With her house still wrecked from the demon attack, Noel hauled up to the front door and told Sarah, "You're the first person I've had over in forever, so please clean up." Sarah spun toward him, eyes widening like, "Wait, what?" Noel didn't bother explaining. He shot his hands up, then unleashed transformation magic and purification spells. Right away, the descendants of magic swooped in, scooped up the ruined house and slammed it back into place. Boom, just like new. Elle's home was totally repaired and Sarah couldn't help but gasp, "This is incredible." After Noel finally dealt with the mess around his house, he brought Sarah inside and they slid into their seats at the table. Then Elle shot his hand up and demanded to know what Sarah's mission was in this village. Sarah ducked her head and mumbled an answer under her breath. Her doubt made Noel's eyebrows pinch together and he gently asked why she couldn't talk about her miss, because it was still painfully hard for her to bring it up from her past, but Sarah kept her head low and shot back, "No, it's not like that." Finally, she gathered her nerve and blurted out that she still had to confess everything to Noel. Then her frown deepened as she admitted she'd come to this village to carry out the king's order. When Sarah brought up the king, Noel froze in shock. Then the girl kept going, saying the king ordered her to wipe out every last trace of Noel Vig, and when Elle heard that, realization hit hard. With his face tightening, he leaned in and asked Sarah why the king would wipe every trace of Noel Vig from existence, silence hanging heavy. Sarah shook her head, saying she had no clue either since she wasn't in on any of it. Noel clasped his hands on the table and demanded to the girl, "Why do you answer to the king? Didn't he hand you this mission?" Sarah stared at the tabletop and shot back, "I'm not one of the king's men." Sarah clapped a hand over her mouth, brows knitted tight as tears fought to break free. She told him her owner had done a ton of good deeds while the demons were being enslaved, yet for all of that the person still felt anything but kind. When Noel heard that the man had piled up good deeds even during the demon enslavement, his stomach dropped. Because that could be one of his old friends, he stared and quietly ordered the girl to tell him the name of the person. Then Sarah shot back to Noel that the man's name was Gouda, and the second that name hit, it yanked up an old friend's memory, the kind who'd rather bury him forever. Elle shuddered. Sarah clocked it instantly and snapped, asking the young man if he knew that guy. Then Elle just muttered that, yeah, he knew him all too well. Sarah dropped her head again and fury blazed in her voice as she snapped that Goodall and the hero, no, Prince Cain, were disgusting to her. They told Sarah that if they had to raze that ghost town to the ground just to erase Noel's tracks, it'd be worth it, and they swore there'd be zero trouble with the place. But honestly, even with all their confidence, those two were the worst. Suddenly, Noah snapped his gaze to the girl and declared loud and clear that he was the hero who saved the kingdom from the Lord of Darkness, not the prince. The moment the young man said it, Sarah jerked her head up, dazed, and demanded an answer again. The young man bragged that he'd slain the demon lord himself, but the king twisted the story and pushed everyone to believe it was Cain, not Noel, who won, and Goudal didn't call it out, so the prince won the people's love anyway. Sarah froze, staring at Noel in shock because her whole world just got flipped. She'd been fooled the entire time and Prince Cain wasn't the hero at all. Elle clocked her confusion and figured Sarah didn't buy what Noel was saying. Sarah shut her eyes and protested, then, calm as a storm, she finally understood everything. The king had ordered her to wipe out the real hero's traces so nobody could ever question that the prince was the true hero. And because Sarah saw the girl herself watch Noel take Hydra down single-handedly and save her, she knew this kid was insanely strong, so yeah, it totally matches the hero's vibe. She whipped her head toward the ale, ready to blurt something out, but her stomach betrayed her rumbled so hard the moment died and the girl went quiet. She bit her lip, dropped her gaze, and blushed deep with embarrassment. Noelle clocked that she was hungry, grinned wide, and burst into laughter, then sprang up from the table and promised he'd cook something for her. Sarah shot up too, already claiming she'd help. To cook anything, they needed water, so Noelle and Sarah sprinted outside to the well and found it bone dry, completely empty. Noelle stared down and muttered that it didn't make sense. Earth goddess protects this land, so how could the well be bone dry? Sarah shut her eyes, leaned over the rim, and listened hard, but there was no water sound at all. This left Noelle even more on edge. He snapped his brows together, rubbed his chin like he was solving a mystery, and wondered what could have happened to the water, then decided we'd better go check on the hacker. When they finally reached the hacker's location, both of them froze because the place was loaded with seals straight out of a demon's playbook, power so wild it could lock up even a god or a spirit, and the scariest part, only the demon himself could break them. Noelle leaned in, studying the seals like they might crack the whole mystery, and figured they were the demon's parting gifts after the city got hit. Sarah shot a hard, serious look and agreed without a word. Suddenly, the young man clenched his fist, swung hard, and decided to shatter the seals on the well, so when he did, Sarah jolted up and gasped, "What are you doing?" Noelle snapped the seals in place and the well exploded with water blasting in every direction. Suddenly, the water spiraled into a towering pillar over the forest, and a girl burst out of it, grinning as she shouted, "I'm back." Thrilled, the short girl stepped onto the Hakuru's edge as Noelle let her go, ripping the demon's seals apart while she cheered, calling Ale a hero and thanking him for saving her. Then the shock hit the young man because she'd recognized him as the hero. He strode up to the girl, blinking in a daze, and asked if she really knew him, because the moment he appeared she'd already shouted, "Hero!" Then she planted her hands on her hips and declared it was true. Only the hero could break the seals, and on top of that she could feel the goddess's protection clinging to him. Noelle heard the girl truly got it, that he was the real hero who crushed the demon ruler, and his smile lit up as he tilted his head, laughing like, "I can't even believe anyone ever saw the hero in me." The girl leapt off the Hakuru, closed the distance to Noel and Sarah, and stood right in front of them, then dropped the bomb. She wasn't just some stranger, she was the goddess of the earth, and even if the seal kept the hero from showing up clearly, it still didn't stop her from waking up and noticing him. Sarah snapped her head down in shock, staring at the girl they'd pulled from Hakuru, and blurted, "Wait, are you really the earth goddess?" Because compared to them she looked tiny and Noel only reached her waist. The earth goddess snapped when she heard her height had everyone overlooking her, then she snapped, "I'm not as small as they claim." And suddenly she felt something, craning her neck to see. The earth goddess's worst fears hit her at once. She shuddered, snapped her brows together, and recoiled in terror, then jabbed a trembling finger at Sarah as Sarah backed up with both hands raised. The goddess shrieked that Sarah was a demon. Noel slid his arms around the girl to stop her from kicking, then flashed a gentle smile and soothed her fear, insisting everything was okay, and that Sarah was a good demon after all. The goddess blinked up at him, shocked. Once the goddess finally caught her breath and quit trembling at Sarah, she didn't hover anymore. She dropped to the ground, and Sarah stepped right up to them, staring hard at Ale as if she was solving a mystery. After a long pause, she asked him straight, was it really true he knew from the very start that she was a demon? Sarah couldn't believe it. Noel knew she was a demon, yet he still charged in, saved her from the Hydra, and broke every stigma around her. With a warm smile, Elle told her the truth. She was in danger, so he acted, no matter if she was human or demon. When Sarah heard that, she dropped her head, smiled, and finally let herself believe it. The earth goddess sprang up and blurted, "Everything's fine," because Sarah was a good demon. Then she offered to introduce herself. "I'm Aqua, goddess of the land of your friendly, awesome neighborhood." Right after Aqua introduced herself, Noel and Sarah grinned and threw their names in too. Then, at the absolute worst possible time, Aqua's stomach growled, and she clapped a hand to it like she'd been hit with instant hunger. The goddess didn't even flinch. She lifted her chin and declared she was starving, and when the girl said it, Noel burst out laughing with his eyes shut like, "Turns out, even gods can get hungry." Noel burst out in excitement, urging them to cook together, and then glanced at Aqua, way shorter than him, to ask if she could summon water. Aqua didn't even hesitate. She snapped her agreement, then filled the bucket with water by using algae. They finally got water, and that meant one thing: they could cook their way through all that struggle into a real meal. After a bit, plate after plate slid onto the table, stacked with fresh, steaming food, and Noel could only hope everyone would dig in and like it. After she slid into her seat, Sarah shot an apology at Noel, drowning in regret. She couldn't help him, and with all that hunting around, she didn't think she had anything useful to offer until her mind sparked. She figured out how to use a knife. Elle showed her the way and then told Sarah, "Don't worry." Aqua grabbed the greens on her plate with a fork and blurted, "Is this a weed?" Noel glanced at her and snapped back, "No, just wild grass, and yes, it's edible," and Aqua instantly realized she hadn't eaten a weed at all. After Noel served them that homemade meal, Sarah took a bite, snapped her eyes open with pure delight and blurted out that it was insanely tasty. After clocking Sarah's reaction, Aqua fired off a skeptical verdict: demons don't get food at all because they basically chow down on edible grass. Then, with zero hesitation, she snatched a bite of that green stuff, shut her eyes tight, and ate. After taking a bite, Aqua snapped her eyes open and gushed in awe that it was incredible, despite the fact it was just an ordinary herb. The goddess lunged for the plate of food and demanded how that herb tasted so damn good. Then Sarah shot a question at Ale: was his cooking really a hero's power? Ale lifted his eyes from the meal and snapped back that it wasn't his magic or his own ability at all. After a bit, everyone dug into their portions and ate up. Aqua burst out, totally satisfied, admitting that just earlier she never thought grass could taste this good. Once they were done, Sarah turned to Noel and flashed him a warm smile, thanking him for the meal. After the meal, Noel leaned in and told the girls gathered at the table, still stuffed and satisfied, that once the news of their friend's betrayal finally left his head, he couldn't stop thinking. Rundown buildings, the empty streets of their village. Noel felt the mental pain hit hard, turned away, and told me the whole village where he'd first met Sarah was sealed off after the demons attacked her. When Noel folded his arms, Sarah leaned in and told him she'd heard the villagers had vanished, because once the demons wrecked everything, they couldn't stay here anymore. After they ate, Aqua stretched like she didn't have a care in the world, praising how everyone was safe now that they'd moved to a new place. Yet even with that, her hope wouldn't die because she still prayed the residents would return someday. Noel snapped his gaze to Aqua, who was still clinging to the hope that moving away would somehow bring everyone back to their native home. But Noel crushed that dream by telling her it wasn't going to happen. Right then, Aqua's spirits just collapsed. Aqua let out one gut-wrenching sigh, lifted her head off the table, and admitted, right there, tears in her eyes, that even as the Earth's goddess, she felt painfully alone without the people who lived here. And that was exactly why Noel couldn't bring herself to say nobody would ever return. He sprang up, gently ruffling the drooping goddess's head like he was calming her down, and the moment she felt it, she shoved his hand away in outrage, blinking like, "What are you doing?" Noel broke into a smile and looked down at the girl, telling her, "I'm back in my hometown. Aqua was born here too." Then he leaned in and promised, "I'm staying for good." Aqua stared at Noel in shock, then blurted out, asking how he could possibly want an ordinary village life when he's the hero who saved this kingdom, and shouldn't everyone adore him instead of the prince? Noel smirked, crossed his arms, and said this quiet life wouldn't stay normal for long, because he could work like he was carrying 100 people at once, meaning he'd be solo, yet the results would hit like a whole crowd. He grinned, waving his hands, and basically said, "It'd be awesome if we could bring this village back to how it used to be." And Elle, still staring at him in shock, turned and asked Aqua if she was on board. The second he pitched the idea, Sarah shot her hand up and declared she'd join them to rebuild the village too, and Noel leaned toward Aqua, still stuck in that chair, grinning as he told her he couldn't wait for it. The Earth Goddess stopped drowning in sadness, broke into a bright smile, and swore Noel could count on her to help rebuild the village, because she was still the friendly Earth Goddess of this district. After that, they rushed outside to kickstart rebuilding the abandoned village. Noel insisted they start with those fields first, and Aqua immediately caught on, waving her hands as she set out to plant vegetables there. She snapped her arms up high, and a sudden wave of water crashed over her head, like she was breathing life back into dead soil so they could finally plant vegetables in this barren wasteland. Noel scratched his head, ready to explain that they had to plant the vegetables first, but he couldn't get the words out. He just let out an impressed sigh when Aqua effortlessly called up water, crashed onto the dry ground, and soaked it through and through. Right after that, the Earth Goddess snapped her hand into a fist, shot it up over her head, and burst out laughing, because green vegetables were popping up, one after another, right before her eyes in this brand new land. Noel slid a hand to his side, grinned, and told Aqua the seedlings wouldn't grow as fast as she wanted. Then Aqua threw her hands on her hips and erupted into a giggle. The Earth Goddess jabbed at a tiny green sprout that had just erupted from the soil that, a minute ago, couldn't possibly grow fruit at all, and the girl grabbed Noel's attention, asking what it was when the seedlings weren't supposed to grow this fast. Noel crouched over the tiny sprout, eyes wide, and gasped when he saw the siblings already sprouting like they'd kicked things into gear overnight. Sarah leaned in too, squealing that Aqua was absolutely lovely. Aqua, beaming with pride, told them not to hold back on loving her so much. She blurted out that this wasn't just her army, other Earth gods backed her too because everyone wanted to rally around the hero. Noel nodded like he got it, but deep down he was still just a former hero. Aqua grinned, dipped her head, and told him it didn't matter one bit whether he used to be a hero or still was one now. The Earth gods didn't care either, because all they wanted was to help Noel. Aqua pointed at herself, blurted that she wasn't any different from the others, and declared she wanted to help the hero too. Then Elle grinned, thanked her from the heart, and made it clear her help mattered. Once the plants were finally in place, Aqua whipped around to Noel and Sarah and shouted that they were about to rebuild the village just like it used to be, before the demons ever struck. Noel grinned and promised they'd turn this village into a better place, and Aqua practically jumped in, offering to pull weeds for breakfast right away, only for Elle to snap back, furious that those weren't weeds at all, they were wild grass. Later on, Noel trekked through the forest and spotted a lone goat, and before it could slip away, she grabbed the moment, slipping a collar and leash onto it right there. Elle snatched the reins and pushed onward, and that goat didn't so much as protest. It trotted right behind him like a loyal shadow. Elle even laughed, saying he never thought he'd ever find a goat in this forest, and honestly it felt downright amazing. Aqua ended up in the forest with Noel right after he found that first goat, and then he started hunting more. Right then, she jabbed at the bushes and shouted that another goat was there too. The Earth Goddess wiped the hungry drool off her lips with a quick swipe, then burst out laughing, because with 2 goats she'd get fresh milk every single day and she could finally drink it to her heart's content. Noel followed Aqua's point with his hopes up for another goat until they pushed past the bushes and froze in shock because there wasn't a goat at all, just a blonde girl knocked out and sprawled on the ground. The young man shot to her side and dropped to the ground next to the girl, yelling to snap her back to herself. Then he demanded, "Are you okay?" Noel waited in silence after the unknown girl said nothing. Then Elle shot a healing spell through her, only for her to stay unmoving and never wake up, and that's when Noel's frown deepened. Since the healing spell couldn't snap her back to herself, Noel let out a frustrated breath, scooped the girl into his arms, and hauled her toward his home, ready to help her and get her cured. Noel rushed her into his home, tucked her under a blanket on the bed, then sat by her side and kept his sword clean. Until after a while the girl blinked awake and realized she wasn't in her own world anymore, but in someone's house. She shot upright in bed, grabbed Noel's attention, and demanded to know where she was now. Noel snapped his gaze off his sword and asked if she'd just woken up too, and right then Aqua burst into the room, all smiles, relieved to see her awake. Then Aqua sprinted to grab a glass, poured it full of pure clean water with her powers, and an unknown girl took one sip. Her eyes widened as she muttered that it tasted ridiculously good. The moment the girl took a sip of water, Noel spun toward her and laid everything out. She hadn't opened her eyes for all this time, so he'd assumed she was sick and rushed her straight to his house. After the young man asked about her condition, her shoulders dropped and she admitted that so much had happened to her. This is why she ended up like this. And then she said she'd been on vacation in a nearby village. She hadn't cracked open a window in ages, but the moment she finally did, the air felt unbelievably fresh, so fresh it practically pulled her outside because she was obsessed with nature's beauty. She headed into the forest for a walk, and then bam, her foot caught on a root. She stumbled, and her head slammed hard as she fell. That's why she crumpled into unconsciousness. After everything, the girl mumbled that she hadn't eaten or drunk in ages, so she was starving right now, and Noel just nodded, saying he got it, then offered to cook for her. Then Noel stared hard at his sword and told him, once you rip off the demonic seals from Aqua and set her free, the whole vibe shifts, everything gets way cleaner. And that's exactly why that girl ended up going outside. Aqua cupped her chin and said the water had only just started gushing into the dead soil, bringing it back after ages, and that was exactly why the air here had shifted so wildly. Once they finally uncovered the whole truth, the blonde girl pressed a hand to her chest and introduced herself as Sonia. Then she grinned and thanked Noelle from the bottom of her heart for stopping and saving her instead of walking on. To cook, they decided to milk the goat Noelle had just dragged home. Aqua grinned and started the job. Sanya stood beside her clutching a milk bottle box while Noelle and Sarah hung back to watch. Watching Sonia help Aqua milk the goat, Noel leaned in and said that, in her eyes, Sonia was a sweet good girl, because she clicked with Aqua right away. Sarah stood beside Noelle, stared down and gave a quiet, sad nod. Right then Noelle spun to her and asked what happened. Sarah leaned in and told him straight up she was terrified for Gyudel, her old tyrant master. If Gyudel doesn't come back, she'll likely send someone else to hunt her down, and that could spell disaster for this village and the new friends Sarah just found. Noelle yanked Sarah's forearm in a comforting grip and told her they'd figure it out so Goodall wouldn't send anyone after her yet. Then Sonia slid right up and offered Noelle a cup of milk. Sarah chugged a full glass of milk, grinned, and declared it delicious, and Noelle just watched with a warm smile, because that sweet taste of milk finally yanked her mind away from the painful memories of her cruel former master. Suddenly, a bubbly, speedy Aqua kid sprang up to Sonia like always, and Sonia barked at her to hurry, because the Earth Goddess was about to set up a race all the way to the river. Noelle spun to Aqua and snapped that Sonia shouldn't be forced to run distilleries yet since she wasn't fully recovered, and it could hit her hard, but Aqua ignored him, lunged in and hugged Sonia anyway while she protested. When Noel spoke, Sonia bowed her head and said, "Everyone thinks I'm healing, but my mental wounds are still there." Right when Sonia finally spilled that her mind was hurting, Aqua snapped up beside her and demanded, "Sonia, can you tell me what happened?" Sonia spun around, stunned to the core. Suddenly, the girl snapped her gaze downward, tears flooded her eyes and Sonia fought them off by biting her lip hard, while the girl sobbed and shook as Aqua's worry hit her like a wave. Sonia bowed her head even lower, arms drooping like they'd lost the fight, and when she choked out that her fiancé had shattered their engagement, Aqua snapped to her and grabbed her hand, trying to steady her with pure reassurance. When Aqua pulled that stunt, Sonia completely broke down. She sobbed like she couldn't breathe anymore, and she blurted out that the entire capital had been gossiping non-stop about her engagement falling apart with her fiancé, so she couldn't stand it one more second. With her hands over her face, Sonia shook with fear and blurted that she'd escaped the capital. Aqua immediately patted her hand and begged her not to cry, while Sarah snapped that nothing was worse than this guy, and Alix insisted the guy was blind. Still catching her breath, Sinya squeezed her hands together and blurted out that her new friends probably knew the girl who was her fiancé, because that fiancé was a total hero who took down the demon lord. Noelle, Sarah, and Aqua just froze, staring at the girl in total disbelief when she dropped the bombshell that her fiancé was none other than the hero himself. Aqua suddenly elbowed Elle in the ribs, burst out laughing, and told Tom not to wear that face when he heard the news, because the Earth Goddess insisted Noelle himself knows it looks about as convincing as a lie. Shaken by the shock, Noelle finally steadied himself, turned to Sonia, and blurted out whether Prince Cain was her old fiancé. The girl shot back that yes, Prince Cain it was, and then she spilled that 6 months ago, right after he crushed the demon lord, he got engaged to the saint he'd been traveling with and Sonia couldn't take it. He burst into tears, screaming that the prince was already expecting a baby. Sonia clapped both hands over her face and sobbed that she didn't even get a chance to hold the groom's hand again. Aqua rushed in to calm her down. Sarah snapped that Cain was the enemy of women and Sonia shouldn't take the blame. Alex chimed in, saying Sonia was actually very sweet. After Noel called Sonia cute, Aqua and Sarah just froze, staring at the young man in stunned silence. Then he snapped back to reality fast, clapped a hand over his face, cleared his throat like a pro, and tried to act all serious. Noel snapped her head toward Sanya and blurted that out of everyone it was her ex-fiancé, now engaged to Saint Stella, who was the lying hero. And as Sanya slowly calmed, she stared back at Noel, hand hovering at her chin in a loud, unanswered question. Noel told her that's exactly what the story says, and once Sanya listened to Elle, it hit her, Prince Cain, the man who used to be her fiancé, wasn't the hero at all. Then Aqua burst out, Noel is the real hero. And Sanya froze, completely stunned. The young man started stammering that it was too hard to explain and asked Sanya to cut them some slack, but the girl shot him down on the spot. She said the Earth Goddess had already told her, so there was no way she wasn't going to believe. The girl glanced around and spotted two goats munching peacefully in the field, and then Sonya beamed and said, "This village is amazing," asking if she could stay here. She said the real hero, Noel, never brags about himself and just lives quietly, and Sonya clutched her chest and bowed, fighting back tears as she admitted how deeply Ailey's kindness moved her. He crossed his arms tight and told her, dead serious, that he'd come back to his homeland, but the real question burned in him: would Sonya decide to stay here for real? He leaned in and asked whether her family would worry while she was away. As Aqua held her tight, Sonya shot back, "I don't know if my family will freak out about me disappearing to some abandoned place far from home, but I'm going to ask them first." When Sonya said she'd ask her parents, Noel's serious act crumbled. She grinned and said, "They'll be thrilled to welcome you to our village." Then Sonya beamed right back and agreed. After a while, Sarah burst in and shouted that everything was ready, then stepped into the room in a brand new suit. She gave Aqua a shy, nervous smile and asked, "So, do you like my costume?" Aqua stood right in front of her, stared at the costume, and blurted out that it looked insanely cool, leaving Sarah more confused than ever as she stammered, "Wait, is it really true?" Sonya sat on the floor, burst into laughter, and clapped a hand over her mouth as she teased that Sarah was a woman, so of course she always had to look amazing. Sarah flashed a smile, clasped her hands together, and thanked Sonya. Noel leaned over to Sonya, stunned that she could have a talent like this. There she sat on the floor, surrounded by fabrics and threads, gushing that embroidery was proper for women, which is exactly why she learned to sew so beautifully. Sonya flashed a bright smile and vowed she'd help everyone in their peaceful little village. After the demon attack, they were still rebuilding, brick by brick, so the people could come back home. Then he planted his hands on his hips and grinned, saying, "Sonya looks way better now than the exhausted mess Elle found." The moment he finished, Sonya snapped to attention, smiling for real as she nodded and agreed. A man stood beside the Hydra Noel had just crushed, and when he saw Sarah finally freed, he snatched her away from those clutches. Then he just froze, staring at the carcass like, who in the world would do this to a monster that evil? This afternoon, Noel got stuck in the field while everyone else kicked back at home, diligently driving the hoe into the soil so they'd be ready to plant those crops and eat together later. While the armored man, fresh off discovering a Hydra in the forest, worked, he slid up behind him and growled that the village was empty, then said it was starting to come back to life. That voice yanked Noel's focus off the job, and she spun around. He stepped up to the man and instantly clocked him, Jersus, his old friend. Then his eyes snapped to Noel and the young guy, and Jersus jolted, wide-eyed with disbelief, demanding to know what Noel was doing in this abandoned place. Noel hauled him back to his place, and Gerzes told him he'd tracked this spot down because he was hunting the missing daughter of the Night Order's commander. Then Elle asked about her, and Gerzes froze when he spotted Sonya sitting at the table. He shot up the moment he realized it was really Sonya. She spun toward him, breathed out in shock, and blurted that she and Gerzes hadn't run into each other in ages. He blurted in shock that Sonya had been hiding in this village the whole time, then snapped in outrage that the entire mansion was in chaos ever since she vanished, only for Sonya to slump there, mumble that she knew everything, and apologize through the floor. Noel snapped his gaze at Sonya, who sat at the table, then planted his hands on his hips. He still insisted her family was top tier in society since she was the prince's bride, and now it turns out she's actually the commander's daughter. Sonya didn't brush it off. She flat out said Gerzes wasn't lying and that she was the commander's daughter, Gushar Almaty. Aqua tapped her lips, curiously asking if being a commander really mattered. Then Noel spun to her and said, "Yeah, because the commander is the whole damn backbone of the army." Gerzes grinned at Sonya, lifted a hand, and told her relatives were panicking. Nobody even knew where she'd gone or what happened, so he urged her to go back home with him. When Sonya heard his suggestion, she snapped her hand to her cheek and blurted out, guilt dripping from every word, she didn't want to go home at all. They expected her, sure, but she'd rather stay right here and help. Ursus froze, completely stunned. The knight, utterly clueless about what was going on, snapped up to Noel and demanded answers. Noel stayed cool and said he and Sonya already talked it through, and they decided she'd need at least family permission before she could stay here. Then Jersa facepalmed hard, groaned out of breath, and finally admitted he got the whole thing. Right then, the door burst open and Sarah rushed inside, shouting from the doorway that she was finally home. Noel tore his eyes off Jersis and greeted her. He grinned and said he'd noticed Sarah was thrilled to be back home. Then she lit up and bragged that she'd hauled in a huge catch today. while Jersis, watching from the side, clenched his lips tight and stared at Sarah. When Noel and Jersis stepped outside together, El lit up and said he still keeps those adventure memories close to his heart. Then he turned to the knight and asked Jersis if he'd ever been in the army, and the young man shot back, "Yeah, that's right." He bowed his head, shut his eyes tight, and when he spoke up, his voice turned stone-cold serious. His new boss had handed him a huge task, so he'd come all this way to finish it. Jersis spun to Noel and said he'd heard Sanya was spotted in a nearby village, but when he rushed in to grab her, the place erupted. Maids panicked, swore Sanya wasn't there, and slammed him with the commotion. Noel dipped his head and smiled because even though he had an important job handed to him by his new boss, Jersis, he couldn't stop worrying about Sanya first, and the way Sanya explained it sounded just like Jersis, someone Noel had known for years. Gerza frowned and shot Noel a question. Did Noel really think he'd changed? Because Gerza was guarding a lost girl he barely even knew, like it mattered more than anything. The knight swore Al protects not just one Sanya but a whole demon girl too, and the second Gerza started talking about that demon, Noel's instincts snapped to full alert, because he wasn't just hinting, he was talking about Sarah. The knight bowed his head and muttered that this was an indecisive mess, yet he still had his own goal. Then, at those words, he slowly started drawing his sword from the scabbard. Noah froze in shock as Jersis's whole vibe flipped in an instant, then he yanked out his sword. With wide eyes, the young man blurted out to an old acquaintance, "What's going on?" Gerzi said, dead serious, that Sarah was a demon on a big assignment, and the knight demanded to know why she was still living with Noel if she had work to do. Noel shrugged and said she stayed with him because the situation left no other choice. Gerza snapped his sword out in front of him and aimed it at Noel, who stood right in his path. The knight snarled that his real mission was to keep that girl working, and warned the situation would spiral fast the moment Noel answered. Noel said it straight, he already knew Sarah's real mission, wipe out every trace that he'd ever existed, and that's why he stepped in to protect her, because she wasn't acting on her own, she was following someone else's command. Gerzes didn't care a bit about what his old friend said, he kept his blade trained on Noel, and the knight snapped that his boss was already teamed up with the hero who'd wiped out the demon lord, the one who instantly rose to the top of the top. Gerzes kept going and bragged that his new boss was so powerful he could basically take the commander-in-chief spot of the knightly order himself, while Noel stared down, tense as a wire, trying to process what Gerzes was really saying about Gaudala. Clamping down on his sword hilt, Gerza warned, "My master is ruthless in strength. If we don't finish this job, things will spiral into a nightmare for all of us because he won't just walk away and leave it like that." Noah stared into the night with iron resolve, knowing duty mattered more than friendship, and he told them straight up he was ready for the storm, because the owner was about to be furious. Gerza's surprise hit him like ice, sword thrust straight ahead, because he never expected Noel to defy his own orders and even his master's will, all for Sarah's sake. And he demanded, would El still stand his ground if an entire army closed in on him? Noah wasn't even a little scared of having to take on an entire army just to save Sarah, so he shot back to Jersa that he was ready to fight. Right then, the knight dug his heels into the ground and lunged to strike, and Noel's brows snapped together as she braced for the brutal truth. She'd have to face Jersis, who was stubbornly clinging to his duty like it was armor. Noel refused to budge, not even with Gerza hurling threats and risking his life, so Gerza froze in place, sword thrust straight toward her. At last, he finally steadied his breathing, let out a heavy sigh, and dropped his head. Then he scratched the back of his own and lowered his sword, letting the tension melt away. Gerza calmly told him he totally understood why Noel would risk everything just to save Sarah. Gerza growled under his breath that Noel pulled off something wild by backing that demon girl. Then the knight pressed El, demanding he knew Sarah wasn't free at all, just someone else's weapon, and El shot back that he'd already ripped the collar off Sarah. When the knight heard all that, he stared at Ale, stunned, and demanded if Noel could really pull off taking off that collar. Then El just smiled and told him, flat out, it only worked because he was a hero, and Jersis nearly short-circuited from shock. For their talk, Noel brought Jersis straight to his house, and once they were inside, Jersis finally exhaled enough to rip off his knight's armor, while El tossed Sarah's collar onto the table, and Jersis swore up and down, furious because he still couldn't believe El was actually a hero. Noel shoved his chair back from the table where lay the collar he'd just ripped off Sarah, and while Jersis stared at it in shock with his hands planted on the wood, Noel leaned in and demanded, Now that the knight had seen the proof firsthand, did he finally believe him? Xerxes grabbed the collar in his hands and declared, dead serious, that there was one thing he knew for sure: whoever had removed it was no ordinary citizen. Noel shot back that, no matter what, he was just a regular villager now, not some hero. The knight lifted his eyes from his collar and locked onto Noel, admitting the young man was right. He'd slipped into ordinary villager life, not the hero he used to be. Then he leaned in and demanded why a real hero would show up here in the first place. Noel finally told Gerza the whole truth, how he and the crew really brought down the Daimam Mord, then turned on him, crowning Prince Cain as the hero, and Gerza just sank into his seat at the table. As Noel fired the story at him, Gerza sat there sipping from his mug. Then the second Noel finished, rage hit him like a truck. He slammed the mug on the table so hard the drink splashed everywhere, and he cursed like he'd just snapped. He shot his hand to his face, ducked his head, and admitted he'd already found it weird, handing a demon girl the job of destroying an already ruined village, but he never guessed a hidden secret was hiding right behind it. Once Xerxes finally settled down, Noel, still across from him the whole time, turned to the knight and said, calmly but clearly, that he wanted to ask for a favor, and Xerxes lifted his gaze and agreed to hear Al out. After that intense talk, Xerxes finally cracked the truth the king had been hiding, and Noel stormed out to find Sarah, then told her the shocking news: Sonia was coming back to the mansion. Stunned beside Sarah, Noel shot back that, yeah, this was exactly how it played out. So Sonia would have to return and spill the full story to everyone about the fake hero, in a nutshell, and then Sarah demanded to know who was going to walk with her on the way home. Noel told the demoness that Sonia wouldn't go home alone. Xerxes would escort her, since he'd been Noel's old friend even back when Noel was still a researcher. Then El said it straight. Xerxes had already shown up here just to find Sonia. After Noel laid out the whole mess to Sarah, he snapped back to the girl and offered to help her handle the prey she'd hauled in from the hunt. Sarah lit up, jumped at the chance, and thanked him again and again. A tiny hand suddenly clamped onto Noel's sleeve, yanking him in place and refusing to let him move, because Aqua was furious that Sonia had to go back. With a sharp frown, the goddess demanded, "So when is Sonia coming back to us?" The young man spun around, stared down at the earth goddess, and the second he saw her face, he knew Sanya's departure had angered her, so he promised her Sanya would come back the moment she got the commander's permission, even if it took a while. Aqua leaned over and asked Noel to go with Sonia Xerxes, but Noel shook his head and refused, while Sarah hauled in yet another deer carcass. Noel turned away, flashed a smile, and said Xerxes had one more job to handle. Later that night, Xerxes was already home with his new owner, and the mission hit him hard: find out what happened to Sarah, because this investigation had been talked about before. Xerxes marched up to his master, didn't even blink, and flat out lied that the fighting demon girl he was ordered to find got wrecked in the Hydra battle, then died right after. Gyudel sprawled on the sofa like he owned the place, swirled wine in a glass, then huffed out a frustrated sigh, calling the demoness useless and snapping that he'd heard she was supposed to be one of the demon lord's best. With his hand at his side, Xerxes told Gyudel straight up, getting into the place where Sarah died was brutal, because the Hydra that killed her still ruled that area. The knight snatched the collar Sarah was wearing, tossed it on the table, and swore he'd tracked it down even with the Hydra wrecking everything, only for Sarah to realize the truth. This collar had been ripped from the demoness Noel, and she couldn't believe the best thing he'd done was finding it. After Xerxes tricked his master for Noel, he marched up to Goodall and begged to be released, because he'd already sent back the results from his mission. Once Gerza was gone, Gyudel stayed behind in that room, frozen in silence, brow knotted in disgust. He swirled and sipped his wine while his eyes kept snapping back to the collar on the table, realizing he still hadn't wiped out every trace of Noel. He dropped his head and flashed a grin, convinced that even with Noel's traces still lingering, a Hydra was already lurking there, so nobody was getting into that village for sure. Then Gyudel burst into a wild, mad laugh. That same day, Sarah cornered Noel and grilled him about what he did with the caller who just pulled her off the line, and Noel admitted he went straight to Xerxes for advice, who told him to use the caller as proof that Sarah really died. Noel grinned and told Sarah, after Gerza flashes that collar and sees what it means, he'll swear you're dead and never hunt you again, so you're free now. Sarah lowered her gaze, then smiled. Sarah lifted her head, broke into a real smile, and thanked Noel again for coming through. Then she turned and told Xerxes the same heartfelt thanks, making it clear she's grateful to both of them. At the same time, Aqua was already pining for Sonya, her brand new friend, and begged her to come back faster. Noah glanced at the goddess and figured Sonya was about to start baking a pie, while Sarah nodded and looked around like she agreed. On their very first night back in Noelle's hometown, Noelle and Sarah came home to a disaster. Aqua was sprawled out on the bed like she owned the place, and Sarah blinked in shock at how she was sleeping, while Elle muttered that there wasn't a single inch of room for anyone else. Noelle roared with frustration because Aqua was hogging the entire bed, so there was zero room for him, and since there was nothing else to do, he just had to swallow the truth. His house would never fit all three of them in beds anyway. Elle finally told him, "Sleep on the floor." He grabbed his pillow, headed for the next room, and told Sarah, "If you want, take my bed, go ahead, then I'll sleep here, and I've even got folding beds too if you need one." Sarah shot upright the second she heard Noelle was planning to give her his bed, then he went and crashed on the living room couch instead in the most miserable sleeping setup imaginable. She blurted out that this absolutely would not fly. Sarah snatched Noelle's pillow in her hands and blocked him from slipping into another room, shouting that Noelle owned this house, so he wasn't giving up his bed to them. Then she grinned and said she'd sleep in the living room instead. Noah's jaw dropped at how relentless she was, and he finally caved. He scratched the back of his head, awkwardly blurted, "If you don't mind, Sarah, we can share my bed, then nobody has to crash on the living room couch." Then Sarah let out a relieved laugh. No one had to crash on the living room couch, and she immediately blurted, full of excitement, that she didn't mind at all if the two of them slept in the same bed. But the second they both crawled into bed, Sarah's impulsive choice came back to haunt her. Because Noelle slept peacefully with his back to her, and she was so embarrassed she couldn't fall asleep at all for the entire night. Next morning they woke up and Noelle shot upright in his bed, then leaned over to tell Sarah she looked exhausted, asking if she'd slept okay. Sarah sighed and said she'd almost gotten enough sleep and admitted she always looked tired. The very next day after Sonya dumped them at home to spill the truth about the hero, an angry shout rang out from the street. Aqua was furious because their oven still wouldn't work. Noelle stood beside the earth goddess and nodded, saying the oven looks perfectly intact from the outside, but it runs on magic and there's nothing inside at all. Elle admitted it was honestly pretty convenient. After staring at the magic oven one more time, Noelle snapped that those magic parts were impossible to fix once they broke that easily, making Aqua's frustration spike, as she demanded to know if they really, truly couldn't be repaired. Elle tilted his head, muttered that he might be able to patch these parts, but he still couldn't say for sure if he'd actually be able to fix everything. Aqua snapped to it right away and kept badgering the young man, begging him to fix the magical parts anyway so the oven would finally work. No excuses, until Noelle clocked just how easy it was to keep Aqua around, sighed hard and gave in. Just as they breathed in, Jersis burst in right behind them, fresh off the job Noel sent him on, and he fired off one question. What were Alay and Aqua doing at that magical oven? Noel beamed at his friend as he hurried back, grateful to say Gerzes had pushed Goodall into accepting that Sarah was dead, and Gerzes just shrugged it off. "Don't thank me. You asked me and I did it because we're friends." Then the two friends dropped into their seats at the table, flanked by 2 glasses of water, and Gerza leaned in, asking Noel if he still remembered the girl who betrayed him, only to rise as a court magician after she crushed the demon lord. Noel's grin vanished. He got deadly serious and said he still remembers Aina, the girl who actually fought by his side against the demon lord, not Prince Cain. He made Elle confirm she knew her too, then Gerza slammed the truth down. "Aina's locked up somewhere." The young man was completely stunned. Someone had actually managed to lock up Aina, and in his mind she'd always been so proud that she'd never let herself be trapped that easily. At the same time, Sonya trekked across the field, pushing through tall grass that swayed like it was alive, and when she finally reached the cemetery empty for ages, she froze at the sight of a girl standing there with her back turned, quietly staring at the grave like she was mourning in silence. Sonya clutched a whole basket of flowers, smiled at the girl, and asked if she knew anyone from the village, only for the girl to shake her head and mention how her old friend lived here, right before he died doing some dangerous task. Sonya didn't even have time to blink. She instantly recognized that the grave where the girl had just stood was her old friend, the one who'd already died. Sonya flashed an awkward smile, fixed her hair, and invited that girl over, then told her she could whip up some tea because she was just as new to this abandoned village and they could chat. The girl didn't put up a fight, and soon Sonya marched her straight to the house where Noel and the others were staying. Sonia flung the door open and blared like she'd just come home herself that she'd finally returned, while the stranger hovered behind her, staring at her with sharp, curious eyes. At that exact moment, Noelle stood right beside Aqua, and the relief hit her instantly. Her friend was here. The second she heard that Sonia was back from her mission, Noelle spun to greet her, then froze hard when his eyes locked onto Aina and a mysterious girl standing with her. Aina clocked Noel at once and just froze in place, stunned. Sonia was just as shocked. She spun to Noel, stared him down with wide, confused eyes, and couldn't wrap her head around how he'd known Aina. Aina's whole body shook with shock when she realized her old friend hadn't died. She even let the bouquet of flowers slip from her hands and crash to the floor. Tears shimmered in the girl's eyes as she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, while Iva hissed that Noel really had been alive the whole damn time. Aina suddenly dropped to her knees, slammed her palms to the floor, and bowed her head in guilt, apologizing to him for betraying him and ditching her friend just because the king demanded it, then swearing she'd take the job as court magician. Noel's face burned as his old girlfriend dropped to her knees like that. He snapped his gaze away, clapped a hand over his face, and told Aina, "Raise your head, look at me." Noelle leaned in close as the girl lifted her head and met his eyes, demanding to know if she'd done all of this because of Prince Cain, the so-called hero who turns out to be a fraud, while Aqua stood beside the young man, hanging on every word. Aina clenched her fists, despair swallowing her words as she told them, "The king sold you all a lie. You must erase the real hero and crown the prince instead so the kingdom's people can keep believing their hopes will survive." Aqua erupted in outrage when she spotted the girl who'd once betrayed Noelle, then leaned over her and declared that Aina would get the title of court magician, right then and there, leaving Aina awkwardly frozen in shock. Noelle, standing right behind a furious Aqua, gently put his hand on her head and snapped that she better stop teasing Aina. Because honestly, it made perfect sense for her to become a court magician. She used to be a beast back in the squad. Tears surged up in Aina's eyes again as she dropped her gaze, admitting that even in the squad it was Noel's forces doing most of the heavy lifting. Then Aina snapped that Ael had actually beaten the demon lord, not her or any of their other friends. Once the girl's fury finally simmered down, Noel strode to the table, yanked out a chair, and practically urged Aina to sit so she'd spill everything later. And then Noel pressed her, demanding to know what happened because that girl was nothing like this before. Noel dropped into his seat, snapped his arms across his chest, and said Aina used to be fearless, so bold she literally dragged him into cooking her food. Then Aina slid into the chair too, bowed her head, and stayed silent. Noel pressed a hand to his forehead and demanded to know why Aina had hauled herself back into prison, arguing that a court magician is meant to mentor, not rot behind bars, and he even asked if he'd said it right. The moment he finished, Aina started gaping in amazement. The girl shot out of her seat, eyes wide, and blurted, "How on earth did Noel know she'd been thrown back in prison again?" Suddenly, she slammed herself back into the chair, slumped over, and let her head drop, frustrated murmurs spilling out that with all her crazy talent, she truly thought she'd nail the court magician's work, but she couldn't. The day that girl was named the court magician, they hit her with the rule. Now that she's a mentor, she's banned from using combat magic, and Aina was absolutely stunned. The magician girl laid out the whole plan for her future work, then told her this. Once the demon lord was gone, everyday magic suddenly exploded in popularity, so they never stopped training it and pushing it out to the people. The hooded mage girl grinned at Aina and asked, "Can you handle this?" Because her combat magic was so dialed in, yet now it would be impossible for her to use. Then Aina stared at the girl, stunned out of her mind. Then she told Noel what happened, dropped her head even lower, and muttered that she was completely useless, while Elle just stared back at her, totally shocked. I stared down and muttered that she'd been hammering her combat magic nonstop just to survive, so she'd straight up forgotten everyday magic, and now she had to use it because combat magic was totally off limits. Every day, the court magicians had to cast real magic, and Aina wasn't ready for any of it, so she hid in the house and studied instead. Like when they all had to fix the church. Everyone else handled it like a breeze, but Aina just couldn't. Aina drilled her daily magic again and again, but every so often it all went up in flames, ruining everything once more. She finally snapped to the truth. She didn't have real talent for this magic at all, only combat magic. Noel listened to his girlfriend's confession, felt every bit of her remorse land in his chest, and then said it all made sense. Aina fled the palace because of this. To prove he was right, she tucked in her shoulders and kept quiet. Suddenly, she snapped her head up, grit hardening in her eyes, and snapped. There was another reason she'd fled the castle and abandoned her post, and Aina said she had to tell Ale no matter what. Aina lifted her head, locked eyes with Noel, and said the fake hero Prince Kane's plan to steal the real one's place was cooked up from the very start. Then Noel snapped, tense, and demanded, "What do you mean?" Then Aina snapped the cruel truth to Noel. After they enslaved the demon lord, the hero who saved them was supposed to be killed right away so Prince Kane could step in and take the throne. At least, that was the plan. Noel froze when he realized they had been setting him up to die from day one, despite the fact it was him who saved everyone, not Prince Kane. He just stood there, staring at Aina in stunned silence, eyes huge and unblinking. The girl swore it was all a setup from the start: turn the prince into the people's hero, win their love, and crank his power over everyone way higher. Noel shot back, asking if Aina had known the whole scheme from the very beginning. Aina shot her eyes down in guilt and admitted she'd only learned about it herself quite recently, after everything was already over, and it was a secret that only the court magicians, Aina included, even knew. The girl leaned in and swore a top-secret document was hidden there. Only a select few with the right status could ever read it, and since she was a court magician, she pulled it open and decoded it herself. After Ine finally spilled the whole truth, Noel's eyes dropped, his hand went straight to his chin, and a deep frown carved across his face. Then he demanded if going back to the capital might be way too careless. Tears streaking down her face, she looked at him and told me she'd come to beg Noel's forgiveness for stabbing him in the back so brutally, just to climb to a high rank at court, even though she'd later vanished from it. Aina admitted straight up that before she ever learned the king's plan to kill Noel right after they crushed the demon Mord, she'd been doing everything for herself, because she knew nothing about him, the real hero the king had tricked. She looked down and admitted it. She had no idea what happened to Noel, so that's why she trekked all the way to his native village, made a grave there, and promised to return with flowers. Aina curled in even tighter, almost bonking her forehead on the table, and blurted that she owed Noel an even deeper thanks for everything he'd done for her. Then she immediately threw in a heartfelt apology, swearing she was truly sorry. After their talk, Noel shoved Aina toward one of the village's crumbled, abandoned houses, and when Iva checked it from the side, she couldn't believe how utterly ruined it was. The young man stood beside her, waved his hand, and spoke with deadly seriousness. If Ine really wanted to make it right after betraying him, after everything they'd survived together, she'd have to rebuild every single ruin in that village. I was stunned. She'd have to rebuild every house from scratch. She tried to protest like, "I only know combat magic," but Noel cut her off before she could even finish. He lifted his hand without a word and cast a restoration spell, and then he used the same magic to repair his house. The moment it hit, the damage vanished and the whole place rebuilt itself, exactly like it was before the demons ever attacked. I stared at the fully repaired house, shining like it had just been built, and honestly it blew my mind because even among the court magicians, not everyone could pull off something like that, and that's when I realized the girl was trying to tell Elle she couldn't. Noel, standing behind her with his hands planted on his hips, calmly promised that he'd teach Aina everything she needed to get home. So when the girl finally tore her eyes off that house and spun around, she blurted out her shock. He flashed her a warm smile and told her, "You can stay in my house while you fix up all these places in the village, no problem at all. We're old friends, and honestly, with how many folks already live there, you'll fit right in." Seeing that Noel was still kind to her made Aina's eyes sting, then the tears spilled fast down her cheeks. She snapped her hands over her face and thanked Noel from the bottom of her heart for the temporary shelter, even after all those cruel insults. Suddenly, the earth goddess stormed right up to them, snapped Noel's jacket with a sharp tug, and hissed in displeasure, forcing him to peel his eyes away from Aina and lock onto her instead. Aqua snapped at Noel that besides the houses, there was one more crucial thing they still had to fix, something he'd totally brain dumped, so Noel whipped his focus to Aqua, nodded along, and told Aina, "Help me." After a while, Aina helped them piece the oven parts back together, and then Sonia and Aqua started baking cookies. Sonia declared they were perfectly done right when Sarah walked into the house and asked from the doorway about the smell she'd been picking up. Sonia spun toward the goddess of the earth and pleaded for Noel and the others to be summoned home so they could crash the tea party and sneak a taste of those cookies baked in a restored oven, and Aqua instantly blurted out a delighted yes. Deep in the forest, two figures square off, swords in hand, ready to clash and settle it there and now. The young guy slips his sword back into its sheath, then the other man suddenly dashes right at him and the kid's eyes go wide with shock. The man swings his sword at the guy, but the other fighter snaps his blade back in time and deflects the strike. Then he glares him down, serious as stone, and tells him to test his determination. The man whips his sword up again, ready to smash the guy one more time. He's locked in, fighting with every ounce of power he's got. The girl watching their brawl snaps to it. This man is her father. She tries to rush in and stop it, but a guy yanks her hand back, forcing her to freeze and wait. The girl blurts out to Skirsis, "Why are my father and Noel fighting?" And right in front of them, the man and Noel keep trading hits without stopping. The girl's question throws Gurzas into pure confusion. He scrambles for the right words, then admits that something strange led them here. Right outside the house, two tethered horses snort in the dust while a bunch of people crowd around the table, and the man Noel just dueled, no kidding, sincerely thanks him for saving his daughter. Noel tells you, "Don't thank me, I didn't do anything special." Then she steps in to help out around the village. The man's smile drops, his voice turns serious as he presses again about whether she'll help in the village, asking if he's making Sonya work. Noel nods and tells him they were short on workers and she'd stepped in to help them out big time. Sanya's father erupts in anger and grabs the main character by the question, demanding to know if he thinks she stayed just to exploit him. Confused, Noel tells him she asked him to stay, then the man slams the table with his palm. He pushes up from the table, grips his sword tight and tells Noel to finally rest, straight up reminding him to take his blade with him. Jersis stared in shock and blurted out that the man was the commander. Then the commander told Noel that if he had anything to say, he'd better say it with a sword, following the rules of the knightly order. Sanya's father and the main character clash again deeper in the forest, and the man's already bracing for his next brutal strike. He insists he's got it all figured out. Then Jersis has the man lift his sword, stand right in front of him, and yell for Noel to use her skill right now, before he orders him to smash the first blow with the sword the king himself granted. The main character stays dead silent and jabs his sword forward, like he's daring the world to respond, while the other man tries to ask what'll happen if it's truly that kind of blade, but Noel barrels in at the very next second and cuts him off with a full sprint. He slams his strike into the opponent's sword, shattering it into a burst of fragments, then rockets past him, stopping right behind the stunned man like a phantom. Noel whips around to the man, throws him an apology, and insists she did everything she could to make her hit land. Two mugs sit on the table, surrounded by a pile of different dishes, and Sonya's father stuns everyone by saying he never in a million years thought the one person who could have ended his life with a sword would wind up in a half-empty village. All three of them are back at the table and the man leans in, praising Noel's sword skills like it's already legendary, saying she'll win admirers in every country. Then he fires off the question, why does he live out in the wilderness? With an awkward stammer, the main character blurts out that so much has happened, and then he realizes he might have finally found exactly what he's meant to do right here. The man grips his fork full of food and sneers that this whole thing is a waste, then regrets it instantly, wishing he'd been a bit more prudent and pushed Noel into the order of knighthood. He takes a bite and tastes it, then the main character stares at him and shoots back thanks for the words, right when the man's face snaps into shock. He stares at the whole feast spread on the table, eyes wide, then asks if every single one of these vegetables is actually grown right in this village. The man can't forget the girl waving the flag before the knights, or the one rushing to help the injured, because those fresh flavors hit his tongue, wake up every craving, and the sweet, nourishing food powers the wounded back to strength. He grins and swears the food tastes better than anything back in the capital. So yeah, you don't come to this village for sightseeing, you come for that ridiculously delicious meal. His daughter strides up with a tray, tells him the water tastes just as great, and both of them thank the earth goddess Aqua for it. The man stares at the pie his daughter brought, then snaps, "What is this?" Sonya grins and says, "It's a meat pie I made myself, I really wanted you to try it." The girl slices the pie herself and her father's jaw drops. "How did she do that?" Sonya grins and tells him she learned it ages ago, back when her mom and the maids showed her. She recalls the way she was taught to cook, then tells him, "I want you to try it on your birthday." Sonya remembers being stuck alone at the table, watching the days drag on. Her father still hadn't come home, so she never got the chance to show him what she had. Gurza snaps to Sanya with a grim face and tells her the commander, as the head of the army, endured brutal hardships just to shield their homeland. And Sanya stares back and says she already knows. She hasn't been a kid for a long time, not for a long time. Someone's arm reaches for a plate stacked with a slice of pie, and Gurza blurts out that his work can matter even more than his own family. The girl leans in and tells the main character by name that this moment matters. Her father's job is to protect the country and guard its future, so if that's important to him, it's important to them too. Sanya's dad takes one tiny bite of the meat pie she made and his face lights up as he blazes. This is amazing. He'd already devoured half his piece. Then the man turns to his daughter and apologizes, like he's begging for forgiveness over how alone she's been feeling. The man stares at his daughter, declares that he's finally staying with his family, and turns to Sanya asking if she'll still be making his meat pies. Sanya stares at her father in shock and Jersis can't believe it. He blurts out again, asking if he's truly staying. The man nods and answers loud and clear that yes, he's staying. The man's mind flashes back to that long-haired warrior in armor, and he admits he was ordered to hand his powers to Gadol. But even now, he can't shake the feeling that he doesn't truly trust the guy. He lets out a heavy sigh like he tried to stall this moment, but the universe won't wait. Time's already here. Noel snaps the name, Goodall. Jersis snaps up from the table, squares to the commander and warns, if you lead the army, our country dies because I've already served you. The man fixes him with a stare and tells him, I've got that gut feeling too. You're not the one who should be guarding this country, but I can't defy the king's order just because my instincts say it's wrong. Noel keeps staring at their conversation, wooden barrels piled everywhere, while Sanya's father opens his mouth like he's about to drop a bomb. Noel glares and asks if that guy is seriously that disgusting, and Gurza fires back that Noel is the real hero. He says it's obvious, because the way he carves control into words with his sword is straight from the knightly orders style. Sanya's father snaps back that nobody told him to sound so polished that he'd butcher the promise tied to their family heirloom. Noel quickly apologizes for it. The man's face hardens. He flat out declares that if this is real, then he can't hand his duties over to Goodall. On the shelves, a bunch of trinkets crowd the space and the sharp-eared girl leans in to ask Sanya, has Noel finished talking to his father yet? Sanya flashes a bright smile and tells the girl, looks like your father finally gave me the green light. She stares at the girl, stays cool and fires back, were you really worried about this? And the girl just blinks, confused like she doesn't know what to say. Sanya swears Noel and her father were locked in a brutal, no-holds-barred fight. She still remembers him standing in front of a whole army of knights, carving his way up to the top on pure sword skill, because even if Noel's a hero, a talent like his can still get broken and bleed. That girl bursts into laughter at Sanya's words, then stares at her in shock, because she remembers the Hydra and how the Knight's Order needed not one but 2 detachments just to touch the beast. She flashes Sanya a smile and asks, do you really think anyone could seriously hurt a person who just single-handedly wiped out Hydra? Plants are sprouting across the field and someone swears this place looks downright luxurious, almost unreal. Up front, the commander and Noel sit facing it and the man admits he can't wrap his head around how this village was empty not long ago. Noel grins and says it's all thanks to everyone pitching in together. With a dead serious stare, the commander quizzes Noel, so the others decided to bunker down in the village too, just because he's here. The comb-faced guy blurts out that he only wanted one thing, peace for the village, so everyone could finally live here in calm. 3 girls stand there, one girl lifts her drink and declares it's delicious, while the other 2 just stand right in front of the goats. A sharp-eared girl drags a rabbit up in front of her and lets out a heavy sigh, and then Gurza steps in, stunned by just how huge that hair really is. The main character whips around to the commander, grins, and tells him, sure, we lost our home, but we can still come here anytime. The commander snaps that he figured it was a colossal waste. Like a hero such as Noel shouldn't burn her strength on a tiny little village. Sanya's father locks eyes with the main character and admits, face dead serious, that the only reason he's pushing him is jealousy of his ambitions. Noel and the commander stand out in the open fields and the commander leans in and tells him straight up, to keep those youthful dreams alive, he's got to stretch his bones a little first. Out in the open air, a stunning building stands like it's calling to everyone, and Sanya tells her father he can head home anytime, plus, if he's hungry for pie, he should come straight to their village. The commander steps up in front of his daughter and asks if she can bake a pie at home, and she shoots back that she still has people she wants to impress. Then the commander turns his eyes to the main character. The man firmly shakes Noel's hand, tells him to look after his daughter, and the other guy nods and promises he'll do it. The commander stands on the street beside the horses and tells Jerzes that Noel's got good intentions, and Jerzes nods along, fully agreeing. Right after Jerzes and the commander rode off on horseback, the girls, including the main character, stay glued to the scene. Noel even blurts that he's the most dependable person she's ever seen, and one girl chimes in that she scored a whole haul of big game today. Sonia grins and tells her it's not just for Sarah. Aqua and Noel get outfits too, because she even made the clothes herself. The main character cradles the clothes in his hands and thanks Sanya. Then the girl standing beside him jumps in. Can she try them on? Sanya smiles and says sure, but she has to show herself later, and after she gets dressed, the girl heads straight into the bathroom. The embarrassed girl drops her gaze and blurts out that, in her eyes, there simply aren't enough clothes here. The girl hoists the hem and blurts that her underwear is basically like a little ribbon. Then the girl in front of her turns beet red and panics, begging her not to pick it up. Amazed, Sonia blurts out that Aqua's outfit fits her perfectly, and the girl standing beside her clocks her style instantly, then admits she thought it was only a ribbon or a rope. Before they can react, someone storms up, throws in a quick apology, and everything hangs in the air. The main character bursts into the room in a jaw-dropping outfit, then turns to Sonia and asks if it's not just a ribbon. Everyone snaps their heads toward the guy in shock. The girl drags him out of the room and barks, "Change your clothes," because he's not allowed to wear that. She calls it a disgrace and then scolds him for wearing the same style. Aqua chimes in saying Sanya was going to wear it anyway and asks, "So, does it fit?" In a room lit by shining windows, there's a gorgeous ornament, and right on the bedside table sits a tall, glowing lamp. The girl hands him a steaming mug of tea and bows low, calling him Prince Kane. Then Kane grins, takes the cup, and thanks her. Outside the gleaming window, several houses stood in view, and the prince grinned, telling them the grand mansion they'll call home is almost finished. The girl grins and asks if it's really true, then beams and says she's so happy. The prince sips his tea and jokes that her smile can whip anyone into action, praising her fresh black tea as the best there is. Suddenly, a long-haired guy bursts into the room like he owns the place, cursing up a storm and snapping that someone's a total weirdo. Prince Kane leans in with a grin and asks the annoyed guy what happened, like he can't let that vibe slide. Rage surges in Gaudel as he snaps at the prince, revealing the commander has postponed the transfer of his powers again. Gaudel stares at Kane and snaps that he's trashing the king's order, intentionally dragging his feet, and then she presses Kane hard. "Are you doing this just because you're the father of my ex-fiancé?" Prince Kane stares at the furious Gaudel, stunned, and blurts, "Why are you so mad? This isn't what you think." Gaudel tells Kane to just shut him down this time, but Kane snaps back in frustration, "Don't push this any further. The commander is loved and respected by every subordinate, and if they rush in, the knights will fight back." Gaudel strides up to the prince and demands to know how the king's orders won't be able to crush him, then asks how to get Prince Kane out of the way, until the girl snaps around, furious, and barks at Gaudel to stop pinning the blame on Prince Kane. The disgruntled guy glares at the girl and snaps, "All right, then tell me what to do." The girl leans in and asks Kane if Commander Gusher is tied to the knightly order. Kane then fires back with the commander's own words, "The order is his family and he only talks like that in public." Girl gasps like she can't believe how wild and amazing that sounds. The girl mulls it over and then says, "Yeah, but family comes first. He's got a lonely daughter. So if you have to choose between Sanya and the order, Kane, what are you going to do?" She flashes a smile, then wonders, can he really keep his post if he's forced to pick between his daughter and the order? Ahead of the fields, a steep slope rises where trees cluster in scattered patches. There a squad of masked men stands, and one of them peels off his mask a little. He tells them, if anyone gets in the way, let them wipe everyone out. Then he orders them to move and the others just fall in line. He sprints ahead with his hand poised by the sword, then boom, something catches his eye. He lunges for the blade, whips his gaze aside and barks, "Who's there?" Jerzes bursts from behind the tree clutching his head, demanding, "Is this not my position?" The masked main guy stares him down and flat out says he's alone, then tells his crew to finish the job already. When no reply comes, he whips around, stunned like he can't believe his ears. He stares in disbelief as every one of his people lies sprawled on the ground, not moving a muscle, shocked because he can't make sense of how this just happened. Suddenly, crackling flashes of electricity burst around him. He screams as he plummets, and his sword slips right out of his grip. Right in front of him, a serious girl in gloves lifts both hands, one thrust forward, and sparks explode from her fingertip. Gurzy stares at her and says that this is exactly what a team member was supposed to do, take down the Demon King, and the girl admits she went easy this time, trying not to kill him at all. Then someone suddenly arrives and tells them everything's clear. Jersis stares at Sarah, shocked to the core, and blurts out, "Did you wipe them all out?" Because she's cradling multiple people in her arms, Sarah admits it's Noel's doing, she couldn't fight them herself. The guy isn't even surprised. He says this totally screams Noel's style, and then he turns to Sarah and asks where he's at right now. Sarah swears that pen S meant for goats and now it's feeding time, so she hauls the bodies along and barks at Gurz's to quit loitering and get to work already. Night hangs heavy as he spots a tiny fountain tucked deep in the trees, and he tells the girl that the aqua helped him push through everything. The girl lets out a triumphant laugh, stands tall like she earned it, and asks the guy what he thinks about the blessing that saved this village. She lets out a heavy sigh, steps right up to the guy, and tells him it all comes down to one thing: she can't stand bad intentions. That's just how she is. Even a god couldn't deny it because she's already a goddess. Sonya grins at Aqua, then points out how her nose has stretched and tells her, "It's all thanks to you, now we'll finally remember." Jersis and Sonya face the crowd with their hands bound, and as the main character tells them it'd be fine if their leader finally spills everything himself. But that won't be simple. Jersis keeps his calm and tells them to leave it to him. The gang leader crumples on the ground and suddenly erupts into screams. Gurza drops down beside him and the guy shoots. "How the hell did you manage to get back?" Jersis leans in and demands to know what his task is in the village, but the guy just stares back in cold silence, refusing to say a word. He slams his fist into his palm and demands an answer, asking if the guy plans to stay silent, because if he does, then he's about to escalate to way tougher methods. The girl with the spark grins and tells Gurza she'll help, then pushes him like, "All right, let's see how many lightning hits you can survive." He jerks his head up, stares at the girl like he can't believe it, and blurts out, "Wait, I know why you're here, right?" She stares at him like he's a mystery, clearly not recognizing his face, and demands to know who he is. The guy lit up with joy and practically gushed, saying he was so honored that Aina herself had asked him for his name. She tells everyone she was born into an elite family and still quietly helps the squad's heroes like a pro, never once bragging about it. That noble will is what makes her truly badass. When she blushes, Jersis leans in and asks if she's not just a shy, ordinary introvert. He keeps lying there staring at her like it's the only thing that matters, while Anna plants her hands on her hips and snaps, "So you're telling me we're trapped in this village?" Then the girl demands again, "Who are you?" and pushes for the truth, "And are you going to tell me why you're imprisoned here?" He finally admits the truth, that they showed up for the commander's daughter, and right on cue, the whole room whips around and glares at Sanya. Sonya blurts out in shock, "Is this really for me?" then demands to know why before she declares clear as day that she's here by her own free will. Night drapes the world and trees creep up around the rock like they've always been there, while the guy insists it's all because the girl was brainwashed. Sonya drops to her knees beside him and tells him she finally got her father's permission, then the guy asks her again like he can't believe it. The main character, who's been quietly taking it all in, finally speaks up and says he wants to listen, then it hits that they just can't seem to understand him. Inside the house, the lights blaze while most windows glow under the night sky, then a couple of mugs of water sit on the table as someone leans in and pushes, "All right, let's talk about everything." The bound guy finally breaks his silence and tells them what job they got, save Sanya. He tells her, "You were brainwashed and it wrecked your heart." Then he demands they take her somewhere she can finally forget, and they track her down through the nearest village's intel. Now he's just sitting there in front of two girls, eating like he's trying to ignore everything. Noel sits right across from the guy and asks flat out if he should be ordered to erase their target. But why would anyone ever give a command like that? The guy just sits there on his chair, staring back, and admits he has no idea. Jersis strides up to Noel and fires off a question, "What do we do next?" Maybe reinforcements are on the way, but before anything else, we've gotta learn who's really pulling the strings behind all of this. With a calm look on his face, the main character stares at Gurza and tells him, "Don't sweat it, no need to worry that much." Noel grins and tells them whoever it is, go ahead, take 100 shots at it. But if you dare lay a finger on anyone here, you're going to pay for it in blood. The girls grin at the guy and Jersis leans in, saying he's the only one who's buying into this, so now they've got to come up with a way that hits way harder. Suddenly, every single person in the room snaps their gaze to one spot. Then two newcomers walk in, and one of them promises they'll wipe out the root of their problems for good, like that's just another day on the hero's grind. A tall guy with glasses stands beside a short girl, then promises he'll wipe out the real root of the problem by eliminating the hero. Noah stares them down and blurts, "Why are you doing this?" The girl shakes her head, insists they're not bad at all, and says they traveled from so far away, then looks up and asks, "Can we have tea first?" Noah's eyes widen in shock. The girl drops a few sugar cubes into her tea, then rushes out an apology for showing up so suddenly. Sonya stands right beside her, eyes gleaming as she smiles, and when the girl reaches for yet more sugar and offers a grateful thank you for the tea, Sonya can't help but beam. Sonya is shocked by how much sugar she's pouring in, and when the girl glances at her, she just shrugs and says everything's fine, because she's got a sweet tooth and she's living for it. A glasses-wearing guy sits right in front of the main character, grins at her and says, "It's always like this, your sweet tooth is to blame." Gurza steps up in front of the guests, clasps his hands and demands to know who they really are. Then the guy quickly rushes out an apology. He flashes a smile and blurts out the truth. He's the third prince of the Shwire kingdom, and his name is Schwartz Shwire. Jersis jolts in shock and blurts out, "Wait, Shwire isn't even the closest kingdom to us, so why in the world did His Majesty have to come all the way here?" Schwartz leans in and says he's here to meet Noel face to face. Then he stares at the main character and demands to meet the real hero who brought down the Demon King. Noah meets his eyes calm as ever and asks Schwartz what he's talking about. Then Schwartz lifts his palm, says, "This is gonna take a while," and orders him to start with the background of this attack, talking about people in masks. Two barrels sit under the wooden beams and the main character can't believe what he's seeing. Everything clicks into place and drags him straight back toward Gödel again. Schwartz cuts in with one quick bombshell: Commander Garsh is retiring. The mess is already handled, so now Gödel just wants the commander's title, and Gurza steps right up, warning that if this is the plan, the army's about to fall apart. He demands to know what Schwartz's proposal is really for. Does it exist to drain their army's strength? Schwartz shoots that down, insisting he never had that plan, and then he begs them to trust him. Schwartz stands before the king. Everyone knows he's the king's right-hand man, nimble, razor-smart, the top courtier by reputation. So when he shows up in the village just to see Noel, it feels wild and suspicious, and Gurza immediately shoots it down, saying that explanation just doesn't add up. His smile drops into pure seriousness as he demands, "Schwartz, what do you really want?" And Schwartz just stares back, stone cold and unreadable. That smiling girl swirls the tea and tells them, "Sure, you can be suspicious, but don't kid yourselves, the prince isn't the monster you've been imagining." Schwartz lets out a steady breath, flashes a calm smile, and tells the main character he's honestly thrilled to finally meet him. He can't stop praising the plan to bring down the Demon King, and meeting the hero feels like the highest honor. But it's criminal that the kingdom forgot those deeds, so the nobles should be ashamed. Now he demands they show off how Noel swings her sword. The prince swears he has to see it with his own eyes. Then the girl lunges in, wraps him in a hug, clamps her hand over his mouth and hisses that he's nothing but a fanatic. Schwartz lays it out for the main character. Here, even a well-deserved hero's title is something you can't get. The prince flings his arms wide and declares, "Step into my kingdom and I'll hand you the title of duke or knighthood, no sweat, no trouble." Schwartz hands the main character a pile of shiny awards and a breathtaking mansion. Because after everything he's done, he's getting the recognition, the respect, and even the kind of honor that comes at the national level. The main character calmly locks eyes with the prince and asks, right to his face, if he promises to move to the Tent Kingdom, will he save the hero's life? Goats are fenced up in the yard. Schwartz leans in and gives the guy a solid yes, promising he won't have to live in that shabby dump anymore, while every girl watches Noel with real worry in their eyes. The main character challenges the prince, "Are you really telling the truth?" And when Schwartz backs him up, the prince swears it's all real, urging him to stop and think hard about the offer. But against the prince's wishes, the main character bluntly tells him this time it would be pointless for him to move. Prince Schwartz stares at Noel, totally dumbfounded, and blurts out, "Wait, what's going on? Can I find out why?" He shoves his palm forward and basically shrugs off the whole hero title and glory, saying the only thing that matters to him is the people right here, and the prince can't help but ask, why? The main character spins away from him and fires back that everyone here trusts him and that the job's worth it, because that's all he needs right now. Noel leans in toward Aqua and asks if things will really change without him. Aqua shoots back with a rock-solid yes, then adds that if he just walked out, she'd never forgive him. Another girl shoots him a desperate, longing look and blurts out that she wants to live with him. The main character whips around to Schwartz and fires, "Can you see it?" And Schwartz just freezes in shock. The girl grabs him by the back, tells him to take it easy, and vows she'll handle the rest. Jersis leans in and quizzes the prince. Does that sweet-toothed girl hail from the kingdom of Shyr too, and is she nobility like him? The girl stands there with her hands on her hips, and the prince blurts out an apology for not introducing her sooner. Then he jabs a finger toward her and declares, "That's Holy Queen Mitrage, the Holy Nation's representative." Everyone stares at the queen, shocked to realize she's the Holy Queen, the top rank in the entire church, and the main character leans in like, "So what else do you even care about?" The queen lifts her hand and bluntly says this isn't any ordinary problem, it's all about keeping Sonya safe. Noel stares back at her, completely silent. The girl queen presses a hand to her chest and blurts out the truth. She doesn't just want the throne, she wants to seize this whole kingdom. Noel corners the queen again, pushing for the truth behind the words she wants to use to take over the kingdom, while Jersis snaps, "Wait," and demands what in the world she just blurted out. That girl isn't just a symbol, she's the king and the prince, and together they point to one brutal truth. The royal family is doomed because they stole the hero the goddess selected, and then they even went after his life. The queen stares them down and thunders that in a world where everyone worships the goddess, sin simply disappears. Jersis mulls it over for a beat, then nods and says it's true, so how in the world are they supposed to fight the king? The girl queen slams the truth. The royal family's curse is crushing everyone, and people are finally breaking under the trouble it brought. She plays the prince's bride like it's a crown piece, and together they crank up the taxes for the mansion build and that huge, flawless wedding for the prince and the saint. No one stops to think about what it does to the people, because nobody dares defy Prince Cain, the man they swear wiped out the Demon King. That's why everyone's getting offended, people are more furious than ever, and a whole crowd of them is boiling with anger. Standing right in front of Noel, the girl blurts that the whole kingdom is breaking down with a crowd failure too, like the world can't even breathe. Then she remembers the fields and swears the harvest here is shockingly amazing. She insists it's all thanks to the goddess of the earth, pure divine spirit, and it's blowing her away, while Aqua stands behind, admiring herself until her nose starts growing. The queen spreads her arms like a sky girl about to take flight, then announces the truth. It's a bound oracle the goddess has handed down, meaning the people get to live a quiet life at last. She snaps that this royal family has screwed up, because they've lost the right to control people. Flag-bearing knights line up before the castle, and if the holy nation kicks this off, the whole place will explode into war, so they'd better settle it from the inside. She finally blurts out that's exactly why she begged the prince for help, and the prince just listens in stunned, wordless silence. After that, Schwartz admits they've been snooping for intel on the kingdom. He won't say it out loud, but they managed to track down a few traitors. Schwartz looks back on Prince Cain and his bride, then blurts out that even folks are sneaking into the royal chambers. The queen squares up to the main character and tells him straight up that they need him in this revolution too, then the guy just stands there, weighing every word. Aqua locks eyes with Noel, and Noel fires back that the current government can't unite the kingdoms, but he's not going anywhere and he's staying right in the village. Schwartz pushes the main character to think it over. This is the perfect chance to strike back at the king who stole their glory for conquering the Demon King. The queen tells him if you can topple them, you don't just save Sonya, you'll finally tear yourself out of this wilderness prison. The prince pushes for a yes, just do it so my fame can be restored. Then the other guy snaps back with a real apology, saying he can't bend his beliefs. Schwartz and the queen can talk about this all they want, but deep down they're still not going to truly get it. They stare at the guy and he just grins. Look, there's something you can spot the moment you eat dinner with me. The main character spins around, beckons them to follow, and promises they'll get to see the village. Sizzling mushrooms hit the grill, and the queen grabs a skewer packed with mushrooms and vegetables, then takes a bite and savors the flavor. Her smile lights up the second she tastes it, and she blurts out that it's all that good ingredient magic, then declares it's so delicious. The main character urges them to grab whatever they want, and the queen plonks food onto the prince's plate with a cruel little warning: "It's bitter, so you deal with it." But the prince snaps back, furious that she can't treat him like he's still a child. Prince Schwartz stands before the trees and tells the main character with a grin that everything was absolutely delicious. Aqua snatches the skewer, Sonia slides a tasty bite onto the table, and Aina steps up in front of the masked people to show them exactly what it is. Gerzes keeps frying his food nonstop, grinning as he says he can't get enough of seeing everyone happy, stuffing their faces with delicious bites and wearing smiles like it's Christmas, because that's exactly what he lives for. Barrels, boxes, and bags are stacked in the warehouse, and Prince Schwartz just told everyone he went over to the granary and realized the Earth Goddess's power isn't hitting as hard as it should. At the table, the queen leans in and tells him it's crystal clear Noel was chosen by her, no questions. Then they dig in and keep munching on those fried goodies. The prince lifts a skewer to his mouth and before he even takes a bite, insists he can't wrap his head around how something this amazing could exist in a deserted village. If he liked it, he'd better rush to tell Sarah she's the one who always gets the food, and she's literally walking around with a pig carcass on a stick. Everyone turns toward Sarah and the prince snaps, asking if she's a demon and why she's even living with them. Sarah just grins, soaking in every word. Noel locks eyes with the girl and tells her she has no other choice, then he grabs her help to fix up the village. After the king falls, the queen tears into her meal and then leans in, asking the guy flat out why he shouldn't be an enemy anymore, and right when things get tense, Noel starts spilling the whole story. With a serious glare, the main character warns that you don't get to abandon her and call it not her problem. She'll need help and she won't be left in trouble. The queen fixes the guy with a dead serious stare, then bursts into a laugh and declares that's for sure. Dole just gapes at her, confused. Someone blurts out his first name and Aina snaps her hand back, pointing straight at the masked guys and their leader, then hammers the truth. They'd promised they wouldn't tell anyone about the village. The main character, skewer in hand, thanks her and asks, "Does this look good on you?" She grins, says yes, then turns it on him. "So you really believe everything I say, huh? And you don't think there's anything wrong with that?" Noel jumps up from the table and tells him to bring me over, then blurts out to the queen, "Can you still eat?" And when the girl lights up and says, "Of course," Prince Schwartz just stares at them. Noel leans in beside Sarah and whispers something, and as Schwartz talks to the queen, he reveals he's finally getting why Noel can't leave the village. The people who just attacked the village are now sitting right there, eating like they belong, and it's freaking weird, because the prince is working with those masked men. Schwartz lifts a mug, smiles, and declares that Noel can take anyone on thanks to his legendary, unbreakable endurance. The queen says, "Yes, right here, even with all that status and race on the table," and then makes it clear. This place feels warm, safe, and welcoming to everyone because no matter how long you hunt, it's nearly impossible to find a spot like this. He digs into the earth with a hoe, and the queen explains that after the kingdom betrayed him, he still dug deep and built his own house. The girl says if he's still a former hero, there's no way he can turn a blind eye to what's happening in the kingdom. Something's blazing in the heart of the trees, and Sarah grabs the main character to ask, "You said all that at the table, so do you really want to fight for what's yours?" Then she leans in. "If you're going to claim your rightful place, can I be with you?" He clutches the dishes to his chest, stares at the girl, and blurts out that he won't think about joining their coup because he refuses to be part of it. He flashes her a smile and tells her straight up, if this village is the issue, he wants her with him, right by his side. Sarah grins with pure joy and tells the main character, "Of course it'll work, just trust me." The girl trips, blurts out that she wants to stay by his side forever, and Noel tries to get her to say it again, but she cringes with embarrassment and won't repeat it. A horse stands under a tree, leaves scattered in front of the building, and then WHAP, someone smacks her on the back and tells her, "I'm done." Gerza stands beside the horse, grips his head, and demands, "Noel, did the Holy Queen and Prince Schwartz leave yet?" The guy nods and tells Tom, "Yeah, they did." Gerza tells him that the moment they get back, they'll start preparing Aku, and hearing that as a knight hits hard, because right there, Noel and Sonia are standing in front of him. The guy spills that the masked crew's anti-assault team is nowhere in sight, and Noel snaps that they bolted before dawn, probably terrified of being spotted. Sonya leans in and asks Jersis if her father will go toe-to-toe with the Holy Queen, but he shakes his head, because after the strike the commander probably won't stay at his post. He drifts through the thought, snaps out of it, and blurts out that even the commander stays a patriot, so he should have asked one thing first: is the king truly worthy of loyalty? Noel and Sonya keep watch as Gerza rides off on horseback. The girl whips around and demands the main character tell her what's about to happen to their kingdom. He locks eyes with her and says, "None of it matters because nothing changes for us." Then he declares they'll build a village side by side, crush anyone who gets in their way, and do it all together. Sonya goes completely silent, eyes locked in thought. She knows that even if Noel never changes, the world around them will still shift, twist, and break everything anyway. He calls her by her first name and she fires back, repeating that it doesn't matter what happens. Sonya heads to the house, flashes a grin, and tells Noel to wash the dishes since they've had a ton of visitors. Then the guy happily agrees. Sanya's mansion, Noel stands in front of some guy, clutching something right in his hands, and he blurts out that he never thought the acquaintance Sonya mentioned would turn out to be a farmer's meeting. The man tells the main character, "I owe you big time, but with the harvest turning rough lately, finding top-quality goods is damn near impossible." In the middle of it all sat a mountain of carrots, bright, beautiful, and piled high, and when the farmer said, "Next time I want to buy those," Noah looked up like he just heard something important. Noel tells the farmer to hang tight because he's got one more thing to hand over, and the farmer grins, asking what it is. Suddenly, he whips his head to the side, and there it is, a snarling, fang-bared creature with an arrow jutting out of its side. The farmer panics, throws his hand up in front of him, and yells, and then, out of nowhere, another arrow streaks through the air, hits the animal dead-on, and drives in deep. The farmer drops hard to the ground, staring in pure shock at the fallen animal. Arrows jut out of its body from every direction. Sarah grins, clutches the bow, and says she hauled it all the way here herself so she wouldn't have to drag the carcass by hand, and man, it's a relief they met in time. The terrified farmer nods and admits it's really a good thing. Right in front of the house, a tree stands there while someone dumps a whole bag of coins onto the table, each coin stamped with different drawings. Everyone crowds around the coins and Aqua jolts in surprise. "So that's all the money from the veggies?" Noel flashes a grin and confirms it's the total, plus the loot Sarah hauled in for 5,000 gold. Aqua stands beside the main character, stares him down, and blurts out what they're buying with it, snacks or sweets. He tells her he needs to buy seeds for a fresh crop, and she lets out a frustrated sigh like she can't believe this again. He thrusts up a finger and tells them straight up, when the village's population explodes, they'd better figure out how to jack up the income. Someone tips the teapot, sending its steaming contents straight into a cup perched beside a pile of dishes, and Aqua immediately stares it down, calling it a forest poppy. Sonya leans in and tells us this wild plant, yeah, a hallucinogenic vegetable, is being sold for a fortune, and it turns out it was grown right here before. Aqua nods like she really gets it, then grins and asks, "Can I find you and can I eat every sweet I want?" Noel stares at her like she's gone insane. He keeps replaying it in his head. He hunted for it in the village, but he's probably just been searching through it that whole time. Then Sarah shoots her hand up and asks, "Can I tell?" The girl grins and says she found a spot that totally hooked her, halfway up the mountain, right in the heart of the forest. Sarah thrusts her hand forward and declares, "It's right here." Aina shoots back that dangerous, poisonous fumes are pouring out of the ground. The guys stand deep in the trees, staring at the fumes that are stopping them from growing crops freely, and Noel blurts out to Anae, "Is there anything I can do?" But Anae just answers, "I can help if it's really that bad." Anna lifts her hand and stares straight ahead, then blazing lightning coils around her as she declares it cleansing. Clouds choke the sky and the sun won't show. Anae asks, "Is it okay now?" The guy nods and tells them, "Yeah, let's move on." Here, scattered through the grass, you'll spot plants of all shapes popping up like they're guarding a secret. This is a magical world, so breathtaking it feels like a divine sanctuary, even though it sits right beside the deadly, toxic earth. Sarah leans forward and blurts what she's discovered. Everyone stares at a plant with giant petals, and when Sarah says it's flickering, Anae just shrugs and says, "Of course that's what I'd expect from you, Sarah." The girl snatches a glowing flower from the dirt. Then, out of nowhere, the light dies and its flicker stops cold. Sarah stares at him, baffled as the flicker vanishes like it never existed. Noel just shrugs and says it stops flashing the second she rips it off. With the dead flower clutched in her hands, Sarah lifts her head and fires off a question to Noel. Will it taste worse if it never shines? Noel leans in and assures her it won't. With a stern stare, the main character whips his head toward Aina and demands to know if anything has happened to her. She nods, says she's got it and tries right now, then thrusts one hand forward and lightning snaps into existence around her, and with a stunned smile she goes, "Wait, it worked." Symbols started crawling around the flower and then, poof, it burst back into glittering light again. Sarah and Ine stared in shock, and Sarah couldn't believe Ine could pull off something like that. The girl lifts her hand to the flower once more and declares that maybe cold magic will fall on it too. Then Noel snaps back, saying if she turns it to ice, it'll steal the flavor as well, so she only needs to chill it. The main character says this trick will keep the flower fresh for ages, and then that dazzling blossom gets tucked into a basket. Noel says there are probably more of those flowers lurking nearby, and Aina jumps in to ask for the okay to cast magic. She'll use the spells the moment we spot the next ones, while Sarah insists she already found it. Dozens of identical flowers glow inside the basket, and beside them Aina lies there, exhausted, whispering that her energy is finally running out. Noel's hand lands on Aina's head and she jolts in shock, then blurts out an apology. Noel fires back, asking if she dumped too much mana and tells her to rest for a bit. If there's a river nearby, he'll go grab water for now. Sarah clutches one of the flowers and drops onto a stone, then blurts out that thanks to Aina's magic, they've hit their goal for today, and Aina just awkwardly admits that Noel can cast those same spells too. Sarah stares at Aina and demands, "Is that really true?" Aina nods and confirms it, then her mind flashes back to Noel in armor, remembering how he took on the Demon King and did it all by himself. Aina stretches her arms with a bright smile and tells him, "I swear I always think you don't really need me, but I still let myself do my job today." Sarah recalls how she dropped the beast with a bow and she gets it, because she's been hunting today too, plus she knows the monster could have been finished even before that arrow flew, but he chose not to. Anna quizzes Sarah, asking if everything really runs on trust because nobody believes in them, so Anna has Sarah change up the assignments and tasks. Sarah still remembers Noel chatting with the Queen in the Prince shorts, how he turned down the Holy Queen's offer back then, but she never truly believed it. She stares at the flower in her hands and blurts out, if it's truly for the greater good, then he should take the offer. The girl clutches her memories of the Holy Queen and the commander, then blurts out, "So does that mean you trust the Holy Queen and the people of this kingdom and believe them too?" Aina throws his hands up, sighs like it hurts, and admits he might just be trying to save himself and the people he refuses to lose to this war. Sarah's cheeks flare up a little as she blurts out, "Is it because you've got people standing right beside you ready to fight with you?" Noel barges in clutching a bottle and claims he brought water. Then the main character turns to Sarah, asking what happened since her face is burning red. Sarah blushes harder, swears nothing happened. Everyone finally piled in and came home, then there it was on the table, a plate of flower petals. Sonia grinned and told us right then that she dipped them in batter and fried them up. All the girls take a bite of the flower and Aina's eyes light up as she declares it delicious, while Aqua grins and says it feels like her cheeks are melting. The main character stares at that flower in awe, and you can practically see him dreaming, just imagining what his life would look like if he could grow them himself. Sonia recalls the farmer and blurts that she's heard this just can't be done because it demands pure spring water, while Sarah stares off thinking about that clean water. Suddenly every guy at the table stares straight at Aqua and she blurts out in disbelief, "What happened?" before Noel slips a hand onto her shoulder and says, "Leave it to you." Sonia and Aqua squat on the street, grinning at a brilliant flower that they somehow still managed to grow. He and Jerzes sat at the main character's table, mugs in hand, when Noel leaned in and asked Jerzes straight up if he'd join the coup. Eyes squeezed shut and one hand clamped to his head, he snaps back that now the general is the head of the army, he's got no choice, he's joining. The main character wrestles with it, then admits, straight up, there's nothing he can do, while the general finally makes his call. Gerza admitted he was scared for Sonia's safety, but Prince Schwartz cut in, saying her old hero was guarding her, so there was nothing to fear, and just like that, Gerza finally believed him. The Holy Queen stands before the crowd by the church, and since the whole place falls under her patronage, you just know they're going to back her. Prince Schwartz stands before the clock tower right beside a tight huddle of hooded figures, and that secrecy grinds his nerves, because where the magicians are standing still isn't clear, and we can only pry loose a few scraps of information from the way that crowd shuts us out. Right in the middle of their talk, the main character locks eyes with Aina, standing in the doorway, hanging on every word. Then she turns to Noel and promises she'll go get something for him. He asks if she's sure, and Aina says she isn't obligated to join the coup, but she refuses to ignore it, and the girl's smile vanishes as seriousness hits her face. The main character blurts out to the girl that he doesn't even care if the coup works, and Ayana's jaw drops in shock. Noah stares at her and tells her they need her in the village, so she's got to swear she'll come back. After the main character blurts out those shocking words, the girl's cheeks flare red. She quickly looks away, and without hesitation, she agrees. Aina stands right in the middle of the trees, waving at the guys like she owns the place, a briefcase strapped to her back, while mountains loom in the background. Sonia, Aqua, Sarah, and Noel take care of her. Aqua snaps that it's over, and Noel slams a huge basket on his back like, "Then I'm going too." Aqua glares and demands, "So where are we going?" The main character stares at the shining flower, declares he'll hunt down Morjalamkin to pack it into the supplies the army needs, just like Jersis ordered, and the flower obliterates exhaustion like it's nothing. Noel stands before Aqua, grins, and tells her with zero mercy that he didn't have time to grab it before it went ripe. Jersis sits beside a pig and a pile of vegetables, grinning as he waves at someone, while every last veggie and all the loot Sarah gathered gets handed over to him. Because no matter how stacked the army's supplies look right now, they're still going to need more. Noel thinks it through, tells them they got paid an absolute fortune, and that's how they end up pulling in around 10,000 gold. Sarah shoots that down hard, swearing she splurged on tons of traps and farming gear, leaving barely any money. Then Sonia chips in that she stocked up on spices and kitchen utensils, and Aqua remembers they even grabbed seeds too. The guy clasps his hands, starts to explain his point, then Aqua barges in and snaps, "Did you just say cupcakes?" Noel shakes his head and yells back, "No, I'm talking about accounting." Sonia clutches her cheek and snaps that princesses aren't taught that asterisk. Sarah fires back that the demonic race doesn't even do bookkeepers and accountants, and Aqua tugs at Noel's clothes like, "So when are we buying cupcakes then?" Out of nowhere, someone blurts out that when it comes to budget management, he'll help them asterisk, and the guys go, "Okay, we're in good hands." A lone figure stands right in front of them, and every single head snaps his way, so the main character steps forward and demands to know who he is. She shoots her arm out toward them and grins, saying she's thrilled to finally meet Noel, because she's got a gift for working with numbers. An unknown girl with a bow perched on her head stares ahead, reaches out and declares, "I'm Lily Tent," then explains that her brother sent her to help them back in the village. By her last name alone, he realizes she's tied to Prince Schwartz somehow. Then he locks eyes with Lily, and the prince's face comes roaring back to him. The girl blurts, "I'm your younger sister," and remembering how her brother once told her about Noel, she finally admits it to him. He says he's grateful for the offer, but why her? She just smiles and tells him he's the real rock, keep in touch with them, and that's why he went with someone so talented, someone he trusts to help them. Lilia lifts her hand and says she learned finance and taxation from an early age, so they can finally relax because she's got them. In Noel's house, the drawers are packed with piles of coins, and on the floor sits one giant mountain of paper bills. Lilia blurts out, "What is it?" And he tells her, "Up till now we've never had to deal with finances," then admits the whole thing is a tangled mess, so when Lilia finally sees the money, shock hits her like a punch. Lilia stays calm and tells them, "This isn't easy, but we can still fix it in an hour." Then she asks for another job the moment she finishes this one. Noah stares at Lily, completely thrown off. She asks a question and he snaps back fast. He doesn't buy it either, calling it impossible. Then he reassures her, saying that if she messes up, no one will drag her back, so she can slow down, take her time, and handle everything step by step. Noel slips into the room where Lily's passed out at the table, locks eyes with her, and grins. That must be exhausting. Then he decides to brew her some tea with Jalamic. He stares at the shiny book on the table, caught in the thought of whether she's finally done, and meanwhile she jolts awake, cheeks blazing red. Lilia rubs her face, cracks open one eye, and there he is. She blurts that he's finally back, then fires off, "Didn't I tell you I'd bounce back fast?" The girl plants her hand on the book and declares that every check is all sorted and filed in this very account book. Lilia slaps 2 more stacks of books onto the table, tells everyone she also checked the village shop prices for harvest goods against the market average, then weighs the ugly problems, spots what needs fixing and digs into the trade plans. The girl flips open one of her books and points right at a page telling him, like in the kingdom of Shwire, the price is set like this. She adds that yeah, those places get hungry seasons too, but right now she's convinced this is the moment to raise prices. She grins, raises her hand with the book and blurts out that the quality is way too good. Her brother lights up and tells Noelle to slowly turn it into a real trademark while the guy just stares at her in total disbelief. Lilia holds a book up to the main character and teases, "If you make me an accountant, can you handle this?" And then she smirks, certain his income is about to climb. The main character stares at a pile of books, completely baffled, then his mind starts to wonder if this is magic. The girl grips the book even tighter, wearing a serious face, and admits there are still some concerns. Right ahead of the castle sit rows of houses, with the village creeping out between them in patches while banners snap across the castle walls, yet the revolution itself is still shrouded in mystery. An armored commander stands before a packed crowd of armored knights ready to command their attention, and with a grim look and a banner billowing behind him, he stares them down like the moment is about to ignite. The girls lounged in the hot spring, splashing and chatting as the blonde shut her eyes, stretched her arms straight out, and lit up with how amazing it felt. Sarah nodded hard, saying it was pure soothing refreshment because that's exactly what a hot spring does, and they all just smiled like they'd finally found their peace. They should thank Aqua and Noelle for that, because the hero stood there with a pickaxe, heaved it over his shoulder, and Aqua beside him beamed, hands lifted in triumph as a roaring pit of water erupted ahead, blasting a fountain straight into the empty space. Aqua broke into shouts of "yeah," then added, "thanks to me," and blasted into the air, soaring over the other 2 girls as her long hair whipped up like a banner and the other girls gasped, hands flying to their mouths. Aqua splashed into the water, ripped up a massive wave, and boasted that this one was unbelievably awesome. Then the 3rd girl, still wrapped in a towel, waded in up to her knees and asked Aqua how she pulled off such a gorgeous outdoor spring. Aqua lounged in the water with her eyes shut, totally relaxed, and when the girl beside her asked, she said it was just normal stamina recovery, then added that it also works wonders for your skin, making it soft and smooth. The girl with the square stared off to the side, fingers hovering near her face like she was plotting something great, and then decided it could totally be a perfect tourist spot. Meanwhile, Aqua flopped down beside her on that little beach, practically beaming like all these moves were a win. The blonde stood waist-deep in the water, staring ahead with wide, worried eyes, and she blurts out, "Do you think tourists will come see us?" The short-haired girl flashed a confident smile and held up one finger, then told the blonde she was only considering the idea, like she already had the next move mapped out. Then she whipped her head toward Aqua, flashed a satisfied smile, and told her she'd handle her back. Aqua's face lit up and she whistled at the newcomer like, "See, she's got sharp instincts, doesn't she?" Now it was showtime. The new girl stepped up to Aqua and started rubbing her back while the blonde between them ran her fingers along her hair. Then she turned and asked the others, "So what's the deal with the water here?" And every girl snapped around to stare. The blonde surged toward another girl, leaving the newcomer and Aqua stuck behind, and Sarah clocked it instantly, whipping her head around and asking what was going on, while the blonde's face pinched with worry like she was wrestling with something heavy. The girls stood face to face in the water and the blonde blurted out a question about Lily's son, right to Sarah's boy, then Sarah locked eyes on her opponent with her mouth hanging open. She spun to the side, tucked her fingers under her chin and stared like she was piecing everything together. Then she said Lilia's seriously talented, because ever since she started handling their finances, she's been a massive help. The blonde glances down with bright excitement, but that smile is hiding pure dread. Then she freezes, searching for the right words, and finally blurts out that just recently, while she was serving tea, she overheard Noel and Jers talking. Back in the day, a girl in uniform burst into the room, clutching a tray with 2 crystal-clear glasses, and right away one of the guys on the sidelines was yapping about Prince Schwartz while she stared straight at them. Jersis sat across from Noel, elbows on the table, fingers tightly crossed, staring like he couldn't believe it. The prince was practically in the king's face, and Jersis couldn't shake the feeling he was trying to light a conflict inside the nearest kingdom. Noel then shot back, asking if it wasn't some order from the Holy Queen. Jersis told Noel that this was probably the reason, maybe because he knows Noel is a hero, and the moment he said it, the young man stared at him, stunned and confused. Then Jersis rubbed his chin with his fingers while he kept his eyes locked on him. Gerza explained it like a gut punch. That power to bring down the Demon King doesn't just threaten the demon world, it wrecks the kingdom's upper class, flips the balance between nations in the blink of an eye and slips right out of the authorities' control. No wonder his mind is filled with thoughts like that. Noel threw his hands wide and said that at first everyone pointed at Prince Cain as the hero, but the moment Noel realized Prince Cain was a genuine hero, he should have just kicked back and relaxed. Gerzes slapped a book onto the table right in front of Noel. Asterisk, the failed prince is actually the hero who defeated the Demon King asterisk, and the cover showed the prince himself, sword drawn, standing there with a girl by his side. Jersis leaned in and told the hero this biography was made to prove just how great Prince Cain is and that everyone was required to buy it. Noel said nothing, snatched the book and tore through the pages in a blur. The man in front of him snapped that they had no choice but to publish the book because everyone already knew Prince Cain was pathetic and barely holding on, while the prince, hemmed in by 2 armored knights, looked drained and trembling, clutching a thin sword low to the ground like it could barely lift. Yeah, sure, some people actually believed every word, and they even argued the Demon King should have been wiped out in a far nastier, more cruel way, with Prince Cain's biography sitting on the shelves, book after book. Gerza said that, but every bit of this biography still checks out except for the hero's name. They've got no clue how watchful the other kingdoms really are. Noel didn't reply. He just went still, glaring at the man in front of him after the speech ended. Right now, Sarah stands with her head bowed and her fingers digging into her chin, because she gets it all. The blonde in front of her suddenly shot up from the water, yelling that Lilia's sand had been sent at Prince Schwartz's request too, and then demanded whether she had some secret agenda. Sarah snapped her gaze to her, stunned. The girl shot back, "Then whoever Noel chooses, I'm right behind him," and she said it with full confidence, talking it straight to the blonde. Sarah crossed her arms and fretted that Noel and Lily were shopping again, then blurted, "What if something happens to him?" And Sarah snapped back, "Noel can handle anything, no matter who comes at him." Blushing hard, the girl burst out that she was coming too, insisting Lily and her couldn't possibly get through this without her, then flung her arms wide and clenched her fists so tight it looked like she was ready to fight the world. Sarah thrust her hands toward the blonde who'd turned away and demanded, "Are you overthinking this?" The blonde sank into her own thoughts and insisted she had to plug every loophole. Then Sarah shot back, "Did you even hear yourself?" Not long after, deep in the city, Lilia teased Sunny, calling him her son, and the blonde, still a little shaky, still stammering, just nodded along like he couldn't even help it. Lilia whipped her head toward Sonia, tapped her own chest, and grinned that she'd studied every local shop's prices, then promised to show the absolute cheapest ones, smiling sweet as candy. Lilia strode ahead, humming with a huge grin, while Sonia followed close behind, glancing left and right with nerves, turning her head every few seconds as they headed down the street between towering high-rises. Then bam, someone stepped right in front of them, slammed the way shut, and ordered them to wait with only the man's boots showing. The girls got boxed in by men who looked straight out of a bandit crew, with buildings flanking them and no way through, front, behind, all blocked. The first guy to step up warned them that if they pushed any further they'd be hit with a fee, and Sonia immediately ducked behind Lilia's back. Lilia went quiet for a second, then blurted out, "How much?" while Sonia stayed tucked behind the little girl. The huge man who'd cut them off towered over both of them and told Lilia straight up it cost 110 gold pieces. Lilia wore a stone-cold serious face, no fear in sight, and snapped back that men like him only chase easy profits. 16 gold is a fair price, even with the inflation rocking everyone lately. The man flashed a confident grin and snapped back that he wouldn't offer discounts. She just needed to pay if she wanted to dodge trouble, because the payment options were apparently whatever she was willing to give. Lily's cape slipped off one shoulder and she froze, shouting, "So what, even if we scream our heads off?" The man snapped back that they were idiots because nobody ever came to a place like this, and as they argued they just stood there face to face. Lilia dipped her chin just enough to shadow her eyes behind her bangs, then flashed a grin and blurted, breathless, asking if it was really true. Sonia, who'd been right behind Lilia, suddenly ended up ahead when Lilia shoved her with both palms and shot herself forward. Then Sonia said she could count on her, and Sonia glanced back at her, totally baffled. When she finally locked eyes with the bandit, she clutched her fists tight, froze on the spot, and mumbled through her words, mouth opening again and again as she struggled to find anything to say. With a shaky breath, the blushing girl shut her eyes and let out a scream, then her words tangled as she shouted, "Help me." The guy in front of them snorted, burst into laughter, and told them they were done wasting time. Behind the bandit, Noel snapped, asking if they'd called for him while the other bandits banged out on the asphalt, knocked out cold, his face frozen in pure terror and the laugh completely gone. One of the girls shouted to Noel's son, and the main character just stood there, staring ahead as his hair slowly came together. A little while later, a stunning building rose ahead, right in front of it. A massive fountain roared, ringed by a maze of railings. Lilia beamed with pure joy, telling the hero she couldn't believe she just watched Noel battle her own reflection, like she felt insanely lucky to witness it. Then the girl pressed her palms together in front of her like she was praying. After her last words, she basically said she already knows exactly how her brother's going to get, like, locked in, and in my head I pictured a blonde guy with glasses staring ahead with a chilling glare. Noel just gave a sheepish grin like, "It's nothing." Lilia leaned in and asked, "So you're saying the likes of those guys were nothing, mere kid stuff for the former hero?" And right then, a bird zipped past the girl. A bird swooped down from above her head and she snapped her head sideways with a sharp gasp, then she shot her hand out and the pigeon settled right into her palm. "It's my brother's pigeon," she blurted, trembling before pleading, "Please forgive me." Someone blurts out, "Sonya's here," and a clear glass filled with liquid gets shoved into the blonde's hands. She snaps her gaze to it, and when she finally speaks, her thanks comes out in a nervous stutter. With both hands gripping the cold glass, she dropped her head and demanded how he knew they were in trouble. The guy beside her on the bench stared her down and said it was simple, he was right there and he couldn't stop worrying about her. She finally snapped her head up, turned and stared at the guy beside her. Then she echoed word for word that he was worried, paused and asked what he meant by all of that while he just kept his eyes locked on her. She tilted her head again and told me straight up that from what she understood, Noel-san was thinking about the lily too. Sonya mumbled an apology, then leaned in and told me she just overheard his chat with Gerza, while he didn't take his eyes off her, just stared and listened in dead silence. He turned his head away, tipped his chin down, shut his eyes and flashed a grin, then he said Lilia was officially on their side now, living right here in the same village with them, no second guessing needed. She kept her head down, gripping the glass with both hands, and when the hero spoke she didn't budge, just stayed silent. Finally, she snapped that she didn't get it at all. How could he trust people that easily when the kingdom had already betrayed him? And yet he still took in Sarah, even the demon. She just can't figure out how to become someone like him until she fully, genuinely accepts people for who they are. Noah shouted Sonya's name and the guy blurted out an apology, but Sonya snapped back that ever since her engagement with Kane shattered, trusting anyone had become brutally impossible for her. He leaned back into the bench and told them, "Since we've both been burned by betrayal, we've got to bet on trust again because that's the real base for lasting friendships." Then he smiled and insisted the village's future would shine bright with strong, friendly ties. So he's banking on Sonya trusting him and every soul in the village while she wipes tears from her eyes, holding on to courage and hope for tomorrow, even as she can't help wondering why he's freaking out over her. Gasping as he stared at her, he realized it all at once. Since the revolution was igniting everywhere, the king's army would come for General Gusher's family. So when she ordered Sarah to guard her, Lilia had already predicted his move. She ran the numbers and saw it coming perfectly. The girl flashed an awkward smile, shut her eyes tight and realized exactly where this was headed, yet she still had no clue. Noel grinned and told her, "I did it all without a single word from me and looks like me and Sarah pulled it off." Sonya smiled back at the guy, cheeks blazing as she thanked him, and there was no question in her mind. She looked him off, fixed her gaze on the glass in her hands, and her whole face burned red with blush. Noel staring at her like, "Wait, what?" Lily sprinted in from the side, waving at them like crazy, while her brother's pigeon perched calmly on her head, "And yeah, I'm sorry for keeping you guys waiting." The girl planted herself right in front of Noel and the guy snapped, asking what happened. Then she stammered, pressing both palms to her chest like she couldn't even breathe. With a squeal of excitement, the girl dragged her fingertip over her temple and announced that the rebel army had been wiped out. Sonya sat there with her mouth hanging open, staring straight ahead beside Noel. Two armored knights loomed in the middle of the trees, gripping swords and aiming them ahead, Yet a few of them stammered and yelled that they had to fall back because their opponent was brutally strong. The man flashed a grin at their screams and laughed, calling them nothing but plain rabble, all milling around like they didn't matter. The long-haired man hoisted his sword high and promised they'd all march straight to hell, armored head to toe as his cloak billowed behind him. Right now, Lilia tells the guys that even though the uprising hit hard, it still can't be called a total failure. The girl clenched her fist, eyes bright, and said, "Just for clarity, General Gusher is totally unharmed, so Sonya-san can finally breathe easy." Sonya shut her eyes, pressed her hands to her chest, and let out a long sigh of relief, while Noel, Sonya, Sarah, and Aqua sat at the table and Lilia stood nearby. With a serious look, Sarah demanded to know why they'd been defeated. Lilia realized she'd totally misjudged Knight Commander Gyudala's real power, because even the general's own men couldn't stand against him, while he calmly figured out her brother's whole strategy, and Lilia couldn't forget this man. Noel wrecked Godella in the fights against the Demon King, and since he was picked to join the hero's army, you know his power is real. Then he slashed one of the armored knights with his sword and blood splattered across the ground. Noel, eyes bright with anticipation, stroked his chin and said Gyudala's name like it answered a question in his head. Lily stared at the hero in front of her and leaned toward Noel to say it straight. For now, her brother has one request. The guy ignored the girl's request, beat her to the punch, and fired back. "So, does your brother want me to join the war?" The girl tipped her head to the side and told him, "No, he doesn't need you to do all that." She said he just wants vegetables from the village and then added that he wants Noel to deliver them herself. On this small wooden cart, carrots and cabbage sat side by side, and the guy asked about them. Sure, he didn't mind, until the girl warned that this place is right near the battlefield and she was scared he'd get hurt. The guy flashed Lilia a grin like, "Everything's okay, I've got it," and Lilia just stared, clutching her chin as she echoed it, right on cue with her brother's instructions. A map of the area lay on the table, and the girl jabbed her finger at one spot, telling him he could slip down that detour road. Right now, the battlefield is set and the big tent is packed with people. 4 armored knights are scattered in different corners, moving like they own the place. Dead center sits Gaudel at a massive table, eyes locked on the knight beside him. Prince Cain and a girl came striding in from the side, and he started cheering General Goodall, calling it an incredible victory. So when the general asked, shocked, why they were here and what trouble they meant to cause, the prince just smiled and said, "Nothing like that, we're only here to visit you." After the victory, the prince couldn't ignore it. He asked why the general was acting so sour. The general snorted, crossed his arms, and shot back at Cain, "If you're going to drop by and waste your free time on me, why don't you train the court magicians instead?" If they'd jumped into the earlier battles, they'd already be partying in the capital right now. Gaudel just tipped his chin down and brought his fist up close to his face. The prince beamed and flicked his hand like everything was perfect, saying it was totally fine. He didn't mind at all. They'd be there soon, ready for the next battle, and the girl who'd come with him, eyes closed, smiling, latched onto Cain like she wasn't letting go. The general barked with a scowl, saying he didn't care one bit whether the magicians showed up late or whether the church backed them. Then he snapped that the prince should act with real nobility for the crown. The prince flashed a grin and said that's exactly why he trusted Gerdala, and they had to crush the rebels fast so they could rally the whole kingdom behind them. Behind the prince, 2 knights hauled a huge wooden box along the ground, and the prince snapped his head toward them with a sharp gasp, because he suddenly remembered how His Majesty adored the general who'd lit up the battlefield, and this was his reward. Tucked inside the knight's carried box, a long sword rested in the cloth, and a sinister black haze began to coil around it like a warning. The general sank down beside the box, gripping the sword hilt in his fist, and the prince broke the truth. This blade was a royal family heirloom, supposedly sacrificed to mark Welder's death and smash the evil god away. The general snapped upright and stared at the sword in his hands, demanding whether it was some kind of ancient antique. Then Cain leaned in and warned him that people believe the evil god will come back the moment this blade is soaked in blood, and yeah, that does not sound good. The girl who hugged the prince grinned up at him and promised that this would earn him even more merits and titles. She even teased that it was so good, because next, he'd finally become a real hero, and right after, Goodall's face twisted into a dark, sinister smile. With a satisfied grin, the general slid his brand new sword into its sheath at his belt, barked that evil god or holy gush. He'd march one more step toward glory, then shouted to everyone, "All right, let's get this started." Across the battlefield, General Gusher sat at his table, elbows planted, chin resting in his clasped hands, while Gurses stood beside him, holding his raised hand up so the bird could drop right in and land. The general cracked open the message and stared at him, and the bird immediately shot off, soaring into the sky, while Gurses, glancing at the general beside him, murmured that the court magicians were finally moving at last. They huddled over the map in front of them, tracing every marked spot. On the right flank, magicians stood ready, and on the left, a knight's order under Gyudala's command formed a tight, claw-like line. If anyone struck them, the whole formation would be wiped out in one brutal hit. Jersis has partford. General Gushard fixed his gaze on the map, silent but furious, eyes narrowing as sweat slid down his cheek. Then Jersis demanded where Prince Schwartz was, and the general snapped back that they had to pull back here, because they just don't get his strategy. Right beside them, a knight blurted out that Prince Schwartz rode out on patrol this morning, and he still hasn't come back. At that, Jersis and Gushard snapped their heads toward the knight in shock, and one of them screamed, "Wait, what did you just say?" Gurza got the sinking feeling Prince Schwartz, no, the Kingdom of Shire, was about to stab them in the back and grab the perfect opening. Just a bit later, a massive road opened up, and armored soldiers thundered in on horseback straight into the gorge, some with gigantic flags blazing on their backs. One soldier staggered a little to the side and came to a halt, and General Gaudel, riding right behind him, yelled, demanding to know why he was delaying. A knight on horseback thundered into view, tipped his head, apologized, and told the general that a carriage had slammed itself across their path. Gaudar was blasting out orders, demanding the card again. Then he snapped that they had to yank her away right now, but the soldier hesitated and warned that the guy leading her was a real headache. Udal tore into his subordinate, then snapped, "Do you really think you forgot you're standing in an army?" and cut the moment off with a curt, "That's enough." The general thundered forward on horseback, then yanked the reins to a stop, grabbing the reins tight and firing off. "What are you even doing out here?" Up ahead, a man was snapping the reins, guiding his cart like a pro as the horses thundered along. Then he leaned in and asked, "So, is this a buzz?" and laughed because it had been forever since they'd last seen each other. The general peered forward and barked, "What's the problem?" Then his eyes locked on who stood there, Noelle, and his shout cracked as her name stumbled out. He yelled that it couldn't be true because Noelle was supposed to be dead. Hero just stared ahead, showing not a shred of emotion. Goodall looked completely wrecked, staring at the hero in stunned disbelief, blurting out how he survived, or really, where he even was, while his mouth hung open and his eyes went wide as he couldn't stop staring ahead. Unlike the general's attitude, the hero stayed calm and said, "So much happened, but now I just grow crops and sell them." And now he was out there doing the delivery, eyes drifting off to the side while he held the reins. The general sank into his thoughts about this guy. Does he know they're trying to turn Prince Cain into a hero, and does he know they betrayed him? Goodall just stared ahead, frozen, trapped in those questions. The cart rumbled with a mountain of wooden crates packed to the brim with fresh vegetables, and the general leaned in, pushing Noelle to buy them. He'd pay double and Noelle could just go straight home. Noelle played like he was really weighing the offer, then let out a thoughtful chuckle and pushed it again, double the amount. But he still has to honor a deal already locked in, so he can't bargain with him. The general looked thunderstruck, the space around him warping like reality itself couldn't believe it. Then he spat insults in his head, demanding the hero admit he had no idea where he even belonged. With a shaky grin on his face, the man stuttered that he'd boost the profit 10 times, so if the deal makes him nervous, he can redeliver the groceries after he's done. Either way, he's buying it all. Just let him take the offer and vanish already. Noah grinned and said it was interesting, and then the general leaned in. He didn't just want to pay him, he wanted to give him everything he could because Noah was already one step ahead of him, and he just asked, "Do you have what you need with you?" He snapped back, "Yeah, I did." Then he leaned in and warned, "And it's crazy expensive for you, are you sure?" The hero promised, "Don't worry, I won't hand it back to you, not even if you regret it later." The general stared at him, eyebrows knitted, trying to figure out what kind of deal he'd just stepped into. He pressed his lips together and tipped his head down, shooting a worried look from under his brows as panic gnawed at him, questioning what was wrong and calling himself an arrogant fool. Null smirked, cocked his head to the side, and told him the general would love that souvenir. Sweat dripped down Gyudal's face as he stared straight ahead, stunned, his mouth twisted, and his eyes went ice-white. He kept replaying the hero's words about the general in his head, whispering, "Wait, is he talking about Gashara? If that's true, is he really our ally?" The hero's expression snapped into something terrifying, like a maniac flipped a switch, and Noel blurted that it was time to take it back. His irises went stark white and his mouth curled into a cruel, twisted grin. The general's face twisted with pure horror, beads of sweat pouring down his skin. Return. Noel's words hit Gudala like a punch. Was this about betrayal, and did it mean he was here to kill him? Goodall's stomach sank. Noel's intentions were always a locked door, but if Noel wanted him dead, then there was only one move: fight back now. The two men just kept staring each other down in brutal silence, and Goodall raced through every word he could use. As he stared at the hero, a wild thought hit him: what if he suddenly goes in and attacks? But Noel just stood there looking totally calm, nothing like him at all. They kept locking eyes in tense silence as Goudal wrestled with his thoughts, and the hero just stared down at his friend, face carved from pure emotionlessness. He can't help but wonder if Noel's on guard right this second, and he keeps snapping his eyes back to his sword, the one Prince King handed to him. Goudal's panic kept climbing. His eyes went huge, his mouth opened like he was screaming without sound, and sweat poured down his face. He cursed under his breath, repeating that there was no way he could win, because right now he was nothing but a dead man. Udal pressed his lips tight, still grumbling harshly under his breath out loud, his crooked fangs bared as his teeth snapped. The general snapped his horse to the side and then thundered forward while his men shouted at Gudal Sama, his eyes wide, fear crawling across his face like total panic. Spinning his head toward them, Goodall blared that Noel was the enemy and everyone had to surge straight to the front line, no exceptions, they had to live. Nerve jitters hit hard as he glanced back, thinking, run now, get away before you're the only one left alive. Gudal charged down the gorge by himself, sprinting flat out and blasting ahead until everyone else fell behind, while his knights just stood there, staring at his back like they couldn't believe it. Knights in gleaming armor surged in from every side, yanking their swords free and thrusting them forward, while Noel's rider just stayed seated, gripping the reins with steady hands and refusing to move. The hero squinted ahead and rubbed his chin like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was this sword really that valuable? He figured General Gusher would love it if he handed it over, but then again, he'd already snapped it once. The knights kept circling him, blades out and aimed straight at his chest, but none of them struck yet, and Noel couldn't figure out what they wanted him to do next. 4 figures crowded the cliff's edge, staring down at the chaos below. One of them just squatted there, perfectly calm. Another stood to the side, gripping a towering staff. A third man lurked behind with a long scythe and a book, and the last shadowed them all, ready for whatever came next. The magician squatted there with a snarl on his face, yanking his long hair back with his palm and muttering that war and all of this wore him out completely. Someone nodded right away, saying, sure, everything can be settled through negotiations. The magician kept chanting Gudala, then stopped dead to ask the guy behind him if he really meant this punk, before snapping his fingers and ordering the court magicians into position, his face twisted with disgust, while the girl behind him stared him down like she already knew trouble was coming. Lavushka admitted she even delayed her experiment for this, and wow, what a disaster. The girl's eyes were bruised and sunken like she hadn't slept in days, and the moment she started talking about getting distracted, her face gave away the misery loud and clear. The long braided man lurking behind them clutched a book to his chest and snapped, we've already come this far, so don't start whining. It's a royal order and I'll show you everything you're capable of. The girl shot down his motivating speech on the spot, not impressed at all, and flatly said she'd had enough. She wanted to go home now. She pushed for it to end fast, then she and the other mage girl both bolted their attention back toward home, while the second girl just stood behind her, silent as stone. Finally, let's talk, because the magician just dropped her own take on how things turned out, then looked the others in the eye and demanded, why don't you just forget it all and retreat? And the moment she said it, her serious face made it crystal clear. She was absolutely not joking. All 3 of them, who'd been staring ahead in sync, snapped around at the same time to face the girl standing right behind them. A long braided male magician with bangs hanging over his forehead snapped his face into disbelief at her words, yanked his mouth open and screamed, then barked, are you stupid? This is a royal order. The magician perched on the cliff's edge grinned and snapped back that he was the real fool. Then he added like it was nothing that Ine could handle those worries all by herself and even a nobody like him could manage it. The girl gripping the staff grimaced and eyed the guy like he was vile, then snapped with pure contempt that when someone like Han opens his mouth with that dumb take, she can't help herself. so she demanded to know why he said it. Once again, the scythe-wielding guy with the book burst into the conversation and snapped at the girl to back off. Thanks to the hero prince, she snagged a spot as a magician and instantly got bold, so he ordered her to stop talking like she owned the place. At the cliff's edge, the guy threw his arms wide and with a nasty smirk dared her by saying the prince's chosen court magician was just a shameless backup, because he figured the Demon King must be so weak that even he could have beaten him. The girl with the staff snapped that she wasn't cut out for the court magician's strength, then admitted she'd already forgotten how long she'd been trapped. Look, it was her fault they had to kick a man out just to keep her spot. She even asked again what his name was, and the guy beside her burst out laughing, saying she was unbearable, she'd forgotten her own name too. The girl was snapped at, basically told, "At least you're useful," and she shot back instantly, "I know that." The second mage girl overheard every word, then went dead silent, no reply, no excuses. The long-haired guy grinned and started blasting magic circles from his hands, then he leaned in and asked the others, "Why not turn these fools into ash before they march on the army?" The girl with the square face sucked in a breath and snapped, "No." She was wildly arrogant, convinced she could pull off any kind of magic, until her studies started cracking that confidence and doubt flooded in as she replayed every past moment, every fight, every spell. With her eyes blazing wide, she stared straight ahead and no hesitation, she declared she was absolutely, unquestionably sure. It was her, not him, who got picked to take down the Demon King, and when she thrust her palm forward, a roaring lightning-like blast of magic tore through the air as massive glowing circles snapped into place above her hand, each one bigger than the last. A magician screamed that it was impossible, then demanded what kind of colossal magic circle this was and how someone like Aina could possibly pull off something like that. The other magicians gathered around the girl in awe as a massive magic circle spread across the sky. Anna stared them down with zero fear and fired back at the court and the magician. She wasn't letting folks like them mess with Noel ever again. Then the girl kept her magic rolling. On the street, a ramshackle tent with no roof and fabric walls sat open, stacked with boxes and a table inside, yet not a single person was anywhere to be seen. A dude with glasses suddenly burst in at the entrance, stick in hand, and yelled what the heck they were doing. Then he barked an urgent order to hit the offense. Turns out the armored guy wasn't random at all, it was Jersis. He blurted out in shock, shouting at Prince Schwartz, asking where he'd been this whole time, while the bespectacled prince hurried toward the table where Jersis stood. The prince strode up to the table, braced one hand on his side and wrapped the furniture with the other, snapping that it didn't matter, just get moving and don't waste this shot. Then one of the men across the table leaned in and demanded, "What chance are you talking about?" Gerzes pushed the prince to understand this. If they struck now, Gaudala's knights and the court magicians would haul them in, and even with all that warning, the men stayed weirdly calm. The prince dipped his chin, shut his eyes, and flashed a smug smirk, then he tugged his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Schwartz leaned in and told the men straight up, Goodall wasn't coming back. Jersis froze in shock at the prince's words, stared at him like he'd missed something, and pressed him until the prince finally explained what he meant. Prince Schwartz rushed to the allies with the news that Noel Dono had already handled him. While the hero kept rolling forward on the cart, reins clutched in his hand, lounging back as he yawned and covered his mouth with his palm. Tucked behind Noel's rolling cart as it rattled on through the gorge, General Gaudala's knights charged the hero, until Noel's strikes landed, one after another, and every single rider got left behind as their horses bolted away. The prince snapped his head up, shut his eyes, and clenched his fist like he couldn't contain the joy, only he hadn't expected it to happen like this. He realized he wouldn't just hold him back. His power was beyond anything he'd ever imagined, and being able to witness it firsthand lit him up with pure excitement as he talked about it. He kept showering the hero with praise, gushing that a blade this fast and sharp could slice through anyone who tried to stand in his way. This was god-tier swordsmanship, art worthy of a title, and the men went silent. With his arms thrown wide, the prince stood with his back to the tent exit and swore he wasn't exaggerating. Then, right then, a colossal explosion tore through the distance behind him and swallowed the entire sky. General Gushar and Jersis snapped their heads up at the chaos, stunned. They blurted, "What kind of explosion was that?" while both of their faces froze in shock at what they were witnessing. One of the armored soldiers burst into the tent, shouted for his boss, "Sir, and screamed that the explosion had ties to the court magicians. Every one of the three men snapped around to stare at the newcomer who just delivered the report. After the blast, a wall of thick black smoke surged across the sky like a menacing cloud, swallowing everything in its path. General Gushard roared so hard his spit flew across the room. Then he slammed out the order for everyone to surge into the royal chambers, yelling for them to move fast and guard every second because their lives were on the line. Clad knights rocketed on horseback toward the towering palace, galloping like a warstorm, while General Gushar bellowed orders behind them, offering every command to smash the royal palace in the blink of an eye. Flag-bearers surged on the attack. General Gaudar thundered forward on his horse at breakneck speed, and the brothers-in-law surged past him before he could react. Finally, he pushed to his feet and stared straight ahead. High hills and jagged mountains loomed on the horizon, and scattered houses sat right in the middle of the road between the mountain and the general. The long-haired man beamed, grin stretched wide as he couldn't believe his luck. He'd stumbled on a village out here, and he decided right then and there to finally rest. The second he heard the noise, he froze on the spot, eyes snapping wide as pure horror and shock crashed over him. He snapped his head toward the noise, and right then, a massive monster, bigger than any human, burst past him, built like a hulking boar and packed with arrows jutting out everywhere, yet it still came charging like nothing could stop it. Just then, the boar-like creature crumpled to the ground and skidded a little forward, its body curling up as it tumbled right onto the creature's back. General Goodall froze, eyes bulging, completely dumbstruck, and only one thought hammered in his head. What was happening? A girl pushed out of the dense trees at last, bow already clutched in her hands, while her other hand slid behind her back, yanking free a bag stuffed with arrows. Then she locked her eyes straight ahead and missed the general right in front of her. General Goodall blurted her name, Sarah, shocked and yet unsure, and the girl jolted, her focused stare snapping away like it got interrupted. Surprise surged into her face and her eyes went wide. The man on the horse snapped his gaze on her and screamed in shock, yelling why she was still alive. Then the girl whipped her head toward him and stammered to Gaudala while her hand, mid-reach behind her back for the arrow, froze in midair. He was yelling at the top of his lungs, demanding and begging her to stop acting like she could just shrug off her servant's collar, and then he snapped, "Who's even able to do that?" The girl went dead silent, staring him down, tense as a wire, a single bead of sweat slipping down her cheek. When General Gaudella tried to piece together the past, it hit him like an electric shock. His eyes bulged wide like it finally clicked. First, he remembered running into Noel on a wagon, then he remembered the report that followed. The man's face contorted as he blurted, "Yes, Noel," and that's when the shock hit him too hard. He tightened his brows, sweat pouring down his face, and realized Jersis was with him. If it's really like that, then Noel is heading out of this village for sure, right now. The man couldn't stop laughing like the universe just proved a point. He never would have guessed he'd land in a place this deeply tied to him. But up ahead sat that tiny village with only a handful of houses, the same ones he'd seen earlier. General Goodall's face twisted into something feral, like a madman staring you down, eyes dead and lifeless. He snarled with a rage-filled grin, wrinkles clawing around his eyes and the bridge of his nose, and shouted that if he snatched Noel as his hostage, he could kill her without hesitation. He snatched the hilt from his scabbard, yanked the sword free, and laughed with his eyes shut. Because after this, he'd drain every resource in this village, turn it into his fortress, and come back anytime he wanted. She shoved her bow up at him, yanked an arrow into place, and screamed like, "Did you really think I'd let you get away with this?" She'll step in to shield Noel and the village he holds dear. Bow pulled right up to her face as she lines up the shot at that man, while the girl's confident expression and sharp words are aimed straight at the general. She leapt into the air, snapped her bowstring, and let fly one arrow aimed at the invader and the same enemy in one brutal strike, while a blur beside her moved too, sending another shot straight toward the general. Arrows just like hers burst out of nowhere and streaked toward their target at breakneck speed, never slowing down. The man, planted on horseback, whipped his sword upward from the ground and blasted the incoming arrows aside. Then the impact erupted into a massive shockwave that shook everything. The girl stared at the chaos, totally baffled, then a sweat drop slid down her face as shock hit her. Her arrows got turned aside with one single swing, and when she looked forward, her mouth fell open in pure disbelief. Sarah finally dropped to the ground and whipped her head around to stare at the boring monster she just finished off, now sprawled and completely still. She sprinted straight at him, clamped her hands on his front hooves, spun on a dime and yanked his carcass up into the air. General Gaudel sat stone still on his mount as a massive monster carcass screamed down from the sky toward him, closing fast, while the boar, whipped by Sarah's throw, spun through the air like a living cyclone. With a smug grin, the man sliced the incoming obstacle in half in a single swing, like it was nothing at all, and he looked totally relaxed and unstoppable. The monster's blood exploded from his strike, spraying straight into his face, and the man snapped to the girl that it was a useless, empty attempt. Once the boar's blood finally cleared his sight, the general snapped his attention forward, and there it was, a storm of arrows streaking straight for him, already closing in too fast to dodge. The general's horse got slammed twice in the body, then it reared up on its back legs and screamed at the top of its lungs, sending the general into a panic as he gripped the reins with both hands and shouted. The man leapt off the wounded animal in a split second, hit the dirt on one knee, braced himself with one hand and kept the sword busy with the other, while the horse's neck streamed with blood as it shut its eyes and toppled forward headfirst. Udal shot his eyes up with a heavy groan and barked, "What is this? Is this demonic servant's real routine?" Sarah gripped her bow, snatched an arrow from her back with the other hand, then shuddered, stared ahead, looked confused and went stone still, refusing to move. During the fight, Sonya burst out of the forest straight at them, gripping a basket brimming with flowers in her bent arm, and the girl froze, confused beyond words, then called out to Sarasan, asking if she was there. Sarah shuddered again, her mouth trembling and her eyes blazing wide as fear gripped her, yet she still couldn't get a word out. He snapped his head back and the general's expression lit up with pure joy at what he saw, then he burst into a smile. In the blink of an eye, the general's blade was already at Sanya's throat. He'd slipped up behind her without a sound and the tip was burning into her skin. General Goodall was smiling like a villain as he gripped the girl hostage, one hand clamped down on Sanya's shoulder, the other pinning his longsword against her throat, and he demanded Sarah throw the bow unless she wanted her to die. Sanya's face went crimson as she stammered at Sarasan, begging her not to do this, and even though Sarah didn't look frightened, the shaking in Sanya's voice made it obvious she was terrified. At the general's command, Sarah snapped her palm open and her bow slipped free, clattering onto the ground by the girl. In the little clearing ringed by trees, Goodall stood right in front of her. General Goodall grinned like, "Yeah, it's a shame," and then casually said he'd be dead anyway so they could just wait and meet Noel in hell. Sarah snapped into furious swearing, staring straight ahead, panicked, mouth gaping. The hostage girl dropped her head and let out a shaky sigh, wondering what would happen if Noel's sand came back and saw her like this, while the man kept yanking at her shoulder and jabbing his weapon straight at her. The man grinned, let out a chuckle, and told the sad girl she shouldn't give up, because the look on his face said he'd already crowned himself the winner of this battle. He told the girls that Noel had been nabbed by his own subordinates, and he still vividly remembered how every one of his knights boxed in the hero's carriage, while Gaudel threw caution aside and rode off alone to slip away. From off to the side, a voice cut in, someone had found it, and then a figure slipped out of the forest. A man in a raincoat, hood up, his face swallowed in shadow so you couldn't tell who he was. General Goodall snapped his head sideways and barked that he was Noel's colleague, claiming it and questioning it in the same breath, while the grin vanished and worry swept over his face as if he already sensed something was going terribly wrong. The robed man shot his hand forward, flipped his palm open, and started pouring out magic, then glowing magic circles erupted right in front of his fingers. Goodall yanked the sword off Sonya's neck in a flash, slammed his palm into her back, and the girl jolted as the prisoner screamed and pitched downward. The sword-wielding man sprinted straight at the magician, who just stood frozen, arm outstretched as he reached for Gudala, ready to strike. With a brutal thwack and a flash of light, Goodall drove his sword through the magician, yanking him up as the body rose on the blade. Then the triumphant attacker cackled, sneering that the man he just crushed was nothing but ordinary rabble. The magician jerked his head down and spat blood, and it ran in hot streaks from his mouth to his chin, while he laughed his head off with a cruel grin, telling Goodall, "I've done it now." The hood finally peeled back and one huge eye spilling blood flashed through the gap. Then she whipped her cloak wide, tugging it in different directions until a sword revealed itself, all while her body carried a spell meant to break the seal. With the help of that sealing sword, the general's blade got yanked free and still jammed right into the middle of her chest, while strange magical symbols crawled across her body. The girl started slipping backward toward the ground and General Gaudel snapped out in shock, shouting what happened. Pinned to the ground, the magician began to speak, stopping between words like each one was deadly, because with that spell she could change the world. The general barked at her, demanding to know what she just said. And when the blade finally hit, it didn't just pierce the girl, it crawled over her as a thin black haze, wrapping the weapon around her body like a snake. The magician crumpled on the ground and whispered that without a shred of talent it was still nothing, just because she'd been stuck in the army to capture the Demon King, like her life had been handed over for magic's sake only to be wasted. And even then, a soft smile tugged at her lips as she said it. That's why she's got to unleash the power to rewrite this unfair world. Then the black haze explodes thicker, choking everything in sight, the sword flares with light spilling from her wound, and she grins like a madwoman no matter what chaos hits next. She was about to unleash an evil god that would crush every living thing in his path. While above them, a monster began to take shape in the sky, its body forming piece by piece like the ribs of a human, and its muzzle was pure nightmare, packed with a monstrous swarm of fangs. As he stood before the general, his body became a stage for a towering black demon-like monster, and the thing was terrifyingly huge. The man got knocked backward hard, slammed onto his back, and blurted out frantic questions, stammering, "What kind of nonsense is this?" That monster's massive tongue lashed across the guy's face while the demon licked him like some giant beast, and the general's scream tore out as his face contorted and his eyes squeezed shut. Stunned and barely conscious, he stared as the monster's mouth gushed a ridiculous fountain of saliva onto the ground, and through the stutter he blurted, "Do you know who I am?" Because he was the one meant to rule this kingdom. The man screamed like denial was his lifeline. He refused to die, still hadn't become king, and as his face warped with raw, primal terror, he yanked his mouth wide and howled so hard that deep wrinkles clawed across his eyes and down the bridge of his nose. The monster yanked open its massive mouth and lashed out with a long, slimy tongue, snapping it around General Goodall's whole body. At one point, the man was inside the giant monster's mouth. Then he slammed it shut and exhaled hard, and just like that, he vanished as the monster swallowed him whole. Sarah and Sonia sat on the ground, frozen in shock, watching everything unfold in front of them. Sarah crouched a little behind the blonde, while Sonia clutched her face in horror. And one of the girls finally blurted out, "Is this an evil god?" Someone finally blurted, "What is even happening here?" And out of nowhere, a massive black monster rose on its hind legs like a towering man, stretched its clawed arms toward the sky, yanked its mouth wide open, and wrapped him in darkness-like tentacles from every side. The sky swallowed itself in pitch-black darkness, the white clouds vanishing as everything fell into shadow. Then a crater ripped open in the black, spilling out blinding light that slammed into the earth like lightning. Far off, a girl stood beside her lamb, wind whipping her long braids behind her as she stared from the side, searching for that massive black crater that swallowed the blue sky. Then she let out a little chuckle like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Aqua stuttered and blurted, "What is this?" Because to her it looked awful, her face twisted in wild excitement and shock, her lips pulled back and her eyes went wide as saucers. Even the nearby city's towering high-rises vanished under a heavy blanket of night, while the black sky lit up in one brutal spot. Lightning slammed down and seared the ground. People in the streets snapped their heads upward as the black crater above the houses swelled bigger and bigger, and the whole crowd burst into shocked questions. Then grim voices followed, calling it nothing short of disgusting. Livestock dropped dead onto the ground, and a man, standing there with a horse he'd tied up with a rope, stared in shock as his animal collapsed, lifeless and senseless. Behind her, more animals lay sprawled out, showing absolutely no sign of life. Another guy gripped a bunch of veggies in his hands, and they were wilting as if the heat had struck them instantly on the gas. His face went wide with shock. Right around him, more plant stems collapsed and died in the same instant, and then a black haze started rolling in behind him. Right now, in a whole different place, the inside of this building screams church, tall walls, gigantic windows, and through them you can see the blackening sky perfectly, while the middle of the hall holds a spiked pin etched with an emblem. The girl nervously scratched the back of her head, mumbling about a chilling premonition, her brow tightly pinched as sweat slid down her cheek, and that massive curly hairpin was holding her hair in place. Around the girl stood others in floor-length black robes while she was in a white dress, and when she pressed her hand to her chest, she snapped that this was a disaster even worse than the Demon King, until she caught herself and swore it was somehow worse than that. She snapped her finger forward and demanded everyone nearby, bishops and the highest clergy, right now. The men in black robes shot ahead instantly, eager to carry out the girl's command. The worried girl swallowed her fear and thought, if we round up every sacred servant, the best we can do is cage this disaster in one spot, so maybe we should beg other countries for help. And her hope died on the spot. No, they won't come. The girl shrieked, begging the goddess to listen as she raised her prayer, and then she screamed the terrible truth: the evil god was back, resurrected. In the next breath, the evil figure burst into a blinding, bright light. The girl pleaded for his power and begged him to unleash a divine blessing. Then, a heartbeat later, a swirling vortex of light slammed into place around the shaped bayonet right in the middle of the hall. A haloed goddess materialized, hovering right in front of the girl like a living miracle, while the summoner girl stood below, staring up. Then the goddess stretched her arms wide and told her clear as day she didn't need her power here. The goddess didn't budge at all, even as her dress fanned and twisted in every direction, while the girl, clueless about what was going on, just kept trying to blurt out something different to the woman right in front of her. A goddess with a glowing halo beamed down at the girl and dropped the bombshell that someone had already moved to help their enemy. Then the girl just froze, staring back with eyes you couldn't read, clearly stunned by what she'd heard. The sky kept darkening, swallowing everything in a black haze, and there, right in the middle of the chaos, stood an evil god, now shaped into something almost human, balanced on his hind legs. The crater's light blazed over him as he threw his head back, opened his mouth and stared upward, while downstairs the girls huddled together side by side. Sarah felt it swell and swell like something was devouring the whole area, so she wondered if the evil god had finally gulped up every last drop of energy as a massive demonic monster loomed in front of her. She knows fleeing is the only play, but her body won't budge and the brutal wind whips her hair straight up in the heart of the disaster. Beside her, Sonya clutched her fists to her chest, shut her eyes tight in terror, and let the wind blast her way, tossing her blonde hair all over the place. Sarah figured she had to help Sonya. Noelle and her just felt like the perfect match. The elf snatched the girl beside her, clamped her arms around her head, and shoved her face to her shoulder like a shield, guarding her with everything she had. And she stared ahead, teeth clenched with worry. A man suddenly popped up beside the girls and apologized for keeping X waiting. The moment everyone caught their breath, the elf shot up out of the ground, still clutching a terrified Sonya. Out of nowhere, Noelle showed up to save the day, gripping a massive sword in both hands, and he strode ahead with total confidence, fearless, like he wasn't even bothered by what was crashing down in front of him. The elf locked her gaze straight ahead, then her neat mouth fell open in shock, her eyes glued to the hero like she couldn't look away. The monster yanked its mouth wide open and terror poured out, tiny, razor-sharp teeth flashed like a shark's, a long tongue whipped out as it roared up into the sky, and its glowing eyes looked like little explosions. With his hands snapping through the air like he was landing 1,000 punches at once, the evil god pitched his head forward and cut off his gaze from the sky. For a heartbeat, it looked like the evil god's body detonated, monster pieces blasted outward in every direction, leaving just the tail and legs behind. With one brutal swing of her sword, Noelle sliced the evil god clean down, his jaw, his eye, and the rest of his body blasted behind her like a nightmare exploding. And she hit the ground on one knee, sword still in hand, while he just stared on, totally relaxed like he wasn't even trying. The sky finally snapped back to normal, soft, white clouds floated there like they always do, instead of that suffocating black haze swallowing every last bit of light. Right on the field, beside the sheep, a confused Aqua stood there, clutching her head like it hurt, completely baffled, so the girl asked, "Are you okay?" But she didn't catch it and just blurted the question again. Aqua spun around, baffled, and demanded why Noelle was here, plus Sarah and Sonya too. Then the hero flashed a grin, slid one hand onto his belt and stared right at Aqua. Behind him, the other two girls flanked him from opposite sides, smiling the exact same way. Aqua propped her chin on her hand, staring ahead like something was about to snap, and she told the guys she had this weird, gut-deep feeling, but Noelle beamed, shut his eyes tight, and said with total certainty, "Everyone's safe." During the attack, the royal castle towered huge and tall, and thick columns of dust and smoke swirled around him. One of the knights' legs clanked in full metal armor, charged straight ahead. Jersis bared his teeth and slammed his sword forward, carving into the soldier right in front of him. His armor buckled under the blow and left him helpless, dead to the world. And as Jersis reeled, a helmeted knight from behind swung hard and nailed him in the shoulder. Jurors snapped around to General Gushar, bellowing for him to charge in, saying he'd hold them right here, and the general immediately nodded, trading sharp glances as they locked in the plan. He charged into the palace and shoved the massive doors open with his own hands, while armored knights streamed in right behind him, and then, boom, he stepped into a brightly lit office. Across the hall, two other men stood opposite him, one guy gripping his own palm like he'd been hurt, yelling at the general that he was reckless, demanding if he even understood what kind of place this was, while the second man just sat there in silence on a chair. General Gushar leaned forward and said, "If the right person takes the throne, there's no need for a rebellion." But reality didn't cooperate. Right now, that man and his soldiers just stood there, staring straight ahead. Finally, he marched up to the man on the throne, declared it was over, and snapped, "Your Majesty." The poor guy just clenched his teeth and darkened instantly, because you could tell he was not okay with how things were going. The general stormed out onto the castle balcony, shot his fist into the air, and roared to the crowd below that it was finally over. Then the people erupted back, chanting for the glory of Lebanon. With hands raised to the sky, the people below shouted for General Gushar to live long and stay strong, and for Livania to prosper, while a massive crowd packed the gates of the royal castle, cheering and celebrating their victory. Sarah and Noel marched down the palace corridor, and the side walls gave them nothing but towering arches, spilling golden sunlight into the halls while the rest stayed locked in shadow. Sarah stared ahead and demanded answers from Noel about the legal case, then he spilled it. When the royal family got toppled, their sins were broadcast worldwide, and now they had to win over their people and even the rest of the states. He angled his body toward the girl trailing behind and said this was exactly why they'd end up officially dragged into court. Then Sarah, staring at the hero, blurted out, "Would the king really surrender that easily?" He paused, shoved two fingers under his chin, and admitted, straight up, that he had no idea. Straightening up, Sarah Turner walked right beside him and leaned in. She had to explain what the saint's punishment really meant, and when it hit his brain, the guy snapped and gasped, remembering Stella. A pristine snow-white corridor stretched on forever, lined with paintings, and at the very end stood a huge, sealed door like a threat waiting to be opened. She gripped the window bars and yanked at the metal like her life depended on it, hands bruising as she screamed, "How did it come to this? A victory parade for beating the Demon King and my wedding to Prince Cain." Then she choked out the question, didn't everyone want her to be happy? Behind St. Stella, the room door swung open while she gripped the bars and stared out the window. Then the guy at her doorway leaned in and asked if she was really listening to everyone else's opinions. And the moment the question hit, she went stone still and silent. In the room, a girl raised her hands to summon the goddess and called for Noel too. She pressed a hand to her waist and snapped that those speeches weren't congratulations at all, they were cries of pure despair, while Noel stood beside her, grinning with the hint of a smirk at the corners of her lips. Since Stella whirled toward them and gasped, yelling for the Holy Queen, and Noel, stunned because the guy was alive. From the bed, she stared at them in utter disbelief. Her face stayed blank as she told the other girls, "You're here to deliver my verdict," like she'd already decided everything. Stella froze on the spot, stammered, and demanded the verdict again, her face turned into pure horror, eyes wide as her color drained away. She snapped her hands up, bristling, demanding why. Then, with a grin that screamed confidence, she said she'd defeated the Demon King and, rude as ever, ordered Noel to confirm it right away, while Noel just stood there staring down at her. They grilled her and asked, was it only the hero who did this? Because they dumped every responsibility onto his shoulders, and right then they were blocking the way. Back in the old memories, Stella, Gaudel, and Aina stood inside the magic circle while the hero waited outside it. The girl flat out admitted it, Goodall's order. The Holy Queen laughed, grinning, "So that's it?" Then she pressed her again, talking about who was involved in the forging crime against a real hero. "Tell me," she said with a sharp smile, "this one's also Goodall's doing, right?" Stella sat on the bed with her hands clenched on her legs, staring at the saint like, "What are you doing?" as the woman closed the distance toward her. The girl inched closer, thrust her hand out in front of Stella, and held her palm right up by her forehead. Then she declared it. From this day on, calling herself a saint would be a grave sin. Stella stared at that open hand, fear snapping through her. The Holy Queen pressed her fingers to the black mark on the girl's forehead, and the girl instantly erupted in dazzling light, Stella's presence snapping onto her skin like a perfect, glowing sticker. The girl yanked her hands up to her head, eyes wide with disbelief, and then she gasped, No way the Holy One had that power because that power was hers. Her hands trembled hard and her face twisted into a horrified grimace as she fought to deny what was happening. The Holy Queen twisted sideways to the floor and snapped back that those words were never hers, she'd only borrowed them from the goddess to aid the hero, and the rage on her face said she couldn't stand what she'd just heard. Stella looked like she was about to break, trembling head to toe, clutching her hair, staring at the floor with a dead-eyed silence, while the queen coldly declared that for her sin and her conspiracy against the goddess, she'd be punished in the monastery of the capital forever. Once she forced the panic down and stopped her hands from shaking, she snapped back, "No!" Then she lunged toward the guy and kept yelling Noel's name like she had to make him hear it. "So now everyone's gonna know he's the hero of the kingdom, right?" Her face turned beet red and tears poured down her cheeks, slipping past her chin like they had nowhere else to go. Shaking and stammering, she blurted that she was carrying a child under her heart, and she couldn't survive a life like that, her cape bunching in her hands as her fist clenched tight, as if she was trying to wrestle her panic into silence. She threw her head back, shut her eyes, and let out bitter sobs, begging Noel to save her as pure, crushing despair filled the air. He didn't blink at her tears, calm as ever, and told her straight up that if she truly wanted to change, she could head back to their hometown anytime. With a hand to his nose, the guy told her straight up. The village was still under construction, pretty rough, not many people around, but if she wanted to start over, he figured it could be the perfect fresh beginning. Her eyes went wide and a hot blush flooded her face as she panicked, screaming, "No, I don't want that, there's nothing in this village." Covering her ears and shutting her eyes, she burst into bitter sobs again, screaming that if she had to settle in a place this remote, she'd turn into some hillbilly and couldn't take it, while Stella showed absolutely zero remorse for what she'd done. The Holy Queen snapped, "Stella," and Stella whipped her head around, grinning like her heart was bursting. She blurted out that she's going to have a baby and that she'll raise him and learn how to be human again, while the hero stood a short distance away, saying nothing at all. The Queen's expression burned with irritation as she snapped that everything she'd said earlier was the punishment she'd handed down. The girl folded over like her spirit snapped, hanging in a thick cloud of misery. Then she loosened her palms from her stunned face and stared straight into the emptiness. She snapped back to that guy and grilled him about the prince, then demanded to know what was going to happen to Prince Cain. They told her he'd be thrown into the mine where every one of the culprits gets shipped, so from this moment on, there's no chance at all they'll ever see each other again. Wiping tears from her face, the girl jerked her head up and sobbed out the queen's words, "You're guilty." Right now, they're stuck in a castle corridor. Sarah insists this is exactly what went down, and trust me, it did not end well for Stella, while the sun's harsh rays spilled down the long hall and trap everyone in its glow. Sarah grinned at Noel. This was her silver lining, because in the monastery she could finally look after her child in peace with no fears weighing her down. Somehow, he managed a sad little smile, let out a heavy sigh, and muttered, "Yeah, it's like that." Then they pushed on. When the girl stepped closer, she laid her hand on his back and gave him a gentle little pat like silent support.